It's now a little bit after 7, and we're ready to start our regular portion of the City Council Redevelopment Agency meeting for May 22nd, 2006. And we're honored tonight to have the San Carlos Boy Scouts Troop 321 here to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Color guards front and center. Color guards, please prepare to present the colors. Color guards advance. Please place your hand over your heart and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 2. Color guard, post the colors. Color guards dismissed. The audience may be seated.
Thank you, Scouts from San Carlos Troop 321.
For the Chair, Matt, do you want to have them come up and just give their names and their troop number? That seems to be kind of tradition, what we've done in the past. Just give them a little
Gentlemen, would you like to come forward and introduce yourselves to the audience?
Name, school? That'd be great.
We're from Troop 321, the Boy Scout troop here in San Carlos. I'm William Jury. I was the SPL, Senior Patrol Leader.
I'm Chris Owens, and I go to Sequoia High School.
I'm Will Clowney, and I go to Sequoia High School.
I'm Bryce Boa, and I go to Tierra Linda.
I'm James Smith, and I go to Tierra Linda. I'm Joshua Navarro, and I go to Tierra Linda.
Nice job.
Thank you very much, fellas. Next item on the order of the agenda is changes to the order of the agenda. Staff, do we have any recommended changes?
We have none.
None? Council members? And none from the audience. Okay, next is report from closed session. Bob?
No report. As the mayor indicated before, there's nothing to report from closed session.
Thank you, sir. And next is council communications and announcements. Why don't we start down here? Brad, do you got anything? Councilmember Lewis?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk a little bit. Matt, we all received your memo about your desire to look at implementing parliamentary procedures. And I would like to request that this get put on the agenda for a future council meeting, primarily because I think that sort of some of the rigid adherence to this type of procedure actually got us into kind of having to, or requesting to reconsider the items from our May 8th meeting. So I'd like to give council an opportunity to discuss that. I don't think it's appropriate right now, but certainly would like to get it agendized if that's indeed your desire.
Well, actually, if I can respond to that, it wasn't my desire to have it agendized. It was simply my intent to have us follow those procedures when we're in our meetings, and not necessarily to the letter of the law. That is something that Christine Boland, the city clerk, passed my way when I first became mayor, and we did pass it out to the entire council to review and to know those procedures so that they could follow. And it's my intent as mayor in trying to run the meetings and keep things in some semblance of order to generally follow those procedures. And so I don't really see it as something for us to discuss. It's more a matter of prerogative of the mayor to have a choice in how to run the meetings, and that's the choice that I have. It's not that, again, that we will have a hard line on that, but the procedures are there for a reason. Most councils follow them to some degree or another, and that's why I had the city clerk pass those out again to have you review them again.
Yeah, again, I'm concerned because, again, Matt, the reason we got into kind of the issues that we did in having to reopen this is because following the procedures to the letter of the law, I think, precluded us from having some useful dialogue without the motion and required second of a motion in order to have any discussion. And I want to make sure that that doesn't occur again. I mean, as a council, there's only 5 of us. I don't generally. I don't know of any other city council that actually follows parliamentary procedures as you've suggested, and that if we were a board of, say, 17 or 19, that perhaps it might be a way to get through the business in a succinct and effective manner. But we seem to do things pretty well without needing to go to a parliamentary procedure. So, and I guess I'll ask my fellow council members if this is something that you have an issue over, or if you'd like to see on a future agenda. I guess I haven't figured that council meetings have been so broken that we need to implement a new procedure to fix it.
Well, I don't have a problem with the process. I think the essence here is that there are rules that carry the day if the day gets a little bit skewed out. You know, sometimes we move in different directions. We have a motion on a motion. I think all we're really trying to do here is just to set some general rules, and these become the map that we follow. But I don't really see that it would change much the tenure in which we do business. So reading through it, unless I'm missing something, I don't see any problem with the process that Matt proposes.
My sense is that if we want to have a discussion about how to run the meeting so that we enhance discussion and so forth, I think that's a healthy discussion to have. In other words, I think, Tom, what you're alluding to, what I get from that and I totally agree with is the procedures are good for point of order and to be able to organize the discussion. I think it's a fair question to say, as we're applying the procedures, are we encouraging council to have discussion about the important issues? So on that basis, I'd be happy to talk about, are we having meetings where we're all feeling like we're getting that done? I'm happy to have that discussion if it's council's pleasure. I do think parliamentary procedures are a great way to at least start to narrow things down when things are unwieldy and difficult.
Yeah.
Bob?
Well, I agree with Councilmember Lewis and Councilmember Davids. I mean, you've got the Robert's Rules of Order are the should we say the roadmap that, as someone mentioned, that we use. Within that, I've seen it done a myriad of ways in different groups that I've been in. I do have to agree in one sense with Councilwoman Teagle Doherty that if you have 17 or 20 people, you've got to have more of a tighter situation because you're going to have people talking 6 ways to Sunday. There are 5 of us. We should all be able to get our words in. I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to talk about anything, anytime, just about. I mean, it's just a matter of just finding the time that we need to do. It won't be this week, and I don't think it'll be the next couple of weeks, but I'm certainly willing in perhaps in July when we have some time, or June, whenever the city manager feels that we're through the budget and whatever, I'm willing to talk about how we, operate and go on a day-to-day basis, whatever.
Okay, thank you. I'll take it under advisement and meet with the city manager on it and see what we can do. Anything else, Councilmember Doherty? Down here, Tom?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
All right. I do have a couple of items that I wanted to make the community aware of. Let me pull those out of my notebook here. The first item is, again, if you weren't here earlier, we did have a recognition for our Healthy City Tutors at 6 o'clock. And just to recap that very quickly, we have this past year we had 192 tutors for 218 students in the age range of the tutors from age 14 to age 94. And if anybody can guess who that 94-year-old is, maybe we'll give you a free dinner or something. To Chow Mori's, right? Wow, that was... The other thing I wanted to make the community aware of is that summertime is coming up, and we do have an aviation museum here in San Carlos, and Hiller will be doing some children's day camps. So if you're looking for something to have your children do this summer, you might want to check out the day camp at Hiller Aviation. They also have a Twilight Helicopter Air Show and Microbrew Fest coming up on June 16th from 6 to 9 p.m. And Vertical Challenge is the next day on June 17th. And so you might want to check out their website or just these advertisements around town for the things that Hiller Aviation is doing. It's a great asset that we have in the community. The next item that I wanted to report on is we all did go to Hometown Days, or many of us did, and we're in the parade and went to some of the events afterwards. It was a very successful event until about, I think 2:30 in the afternoon on Sunday when the rains finally did come down. But it was a great event, and I just wanted to recognize Laura Tuchel, Linda Tuchel, and Nancy Gutzel. I know there are a lot of people involved in Hometown Days and working behind the scenes and so forth, but I got to tell you, I was there most of the weekend doing different duties that these ladies had assigned me to as the mayor, and every time I turned around and went somewhere, I saw them, carrying a bucket or a sign or doing something. They were very, very busy working and organizing that event for the community, and it was a very successful event. I also want to thank Cheryl and the Chamber and their help with that event, and also all of our service clubs, the Kiwanis, the Rotarians, and the Lions Club, and also the involvement from all of our schools. We had involvement from little preschools all the way up through middle school, Woodside High School, Carlmont High School, involving themselves in the parade. And so it's just a great community event that is to be appreciated. The other thing that went on this weekend was I went to a couple of events. Tom and Vera Lynn were there as well that were to introduce us to the folks from Pass Christian. And what I want to do at this time is hand the rest of this over to Cheryl Pomerank, our Executive Director from the Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to go Wednesday night to the airport and pick up the two key leaders from Pass Christian and become very well acquainted with them. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, in September of 2005, the City Council of San Carlos adopted Pass Christian, Mississippi. They are one of the cities that was just literally wiped out by Hurricane Katrina last August 29th. And many of us in town who have been active on the Hurricane Relief Committee have had the joy of being with Wilma Rizzardi, who is the CEO of the San Carlos, you can be the CEO of our chamber, of the Pass Christian Chamber of Commerce, and which our chamber formally adopted through the U.S. Chamber, and of Lou Rizzardi, who is the city councilman from Pass Christian, Mississippi. They are known there as aldermen, and so a little bit of word difference. But we have had them on an itinerary. We thought they were going to come out here for rest because we told them, you haven't been away since the hurricane, and you really need to kind of wind down and just have some relaxed time and meet San Carlos and look around the town. They said, no, we're high-energy people. We want a schedule. So they have been on a schedule, and it's been so much fun to get to know them and to get to know more about the story of what happened during the hurricane. They are leaving in the morning, unfortunately, but now we have all put a face with the voice on the phone, and we've had a couple of teams go down there, and it was fun for them to host. Thanks to Fred Kohler for actually keeping them all in his home over the time that they've been here, and for Dave and Chris Tom, who own Bruce Bauer Lumber, which used to be in San Carlos, who have had them and had us all for barbecue and so forth. So I'm going to let them talk for a moment, but I do want to tell you that they presented us with a wonderful book that the children of Pass Christian put together called Story of a Storm. And the children all signed these. They gave 3 books to the city of San Carlos. They all signed the books. One will be at the chamber. If anyone would like to come in and see it, please do. It's a lovely, lovely story. It's a sad story, but it's real for the children there. And one will be given to the library in the next couple of days. It will be in the children's section there. And one will be presented to the school district to be shared among the schools. And Wilma and Lou went to Tierra Linda on Friday morning to meet with some 8th graders there who are doing a project for Pass Christian called Pass It Forward. There have been a lot of wonderful things done by all of you residents over the last 10, 11 months, whatever this has been. We have raised over $34,000. We have given them over $40,000 in gift cards, thanks to your generosity. We have sent towels. We have sent teddy bears. We have sent a lot of wonderful things. And if you're looking for what you can continue to do, because our commitment was to a long-term relationship with these folks, then you can go to the city's website, the chamber's website. We both have a dedicated part for Pass Christian. I'd like to let Lou Rizzardi speak about what their experiences have been and what they've had a chance to see while they've been here. So, Lou?
Thank you. If it pleases the court, or the board, I'm sorry. To put things in perspective, as I told the children at the school, and I'll say some of the same things here, just to give you some idea of what we were faced with. Try to picture a line from here to Carmel, a half a mile wide, totally destroyed, and you'll get some idea of what we're faced with. We are a part of that total destruction, and things that come to us are greatly appreciated. Your city, your area has been of tremendous support. Your prayers, the monies you send, the gifts you send, just folks who show up and smile and say, hey, everything's going to be okay. You know, this this goes a long way towards helping us keep our spirits boosted. And I want you to know, don't ever underestimate. You know, if you see somebody from the Mississippi, especially from Pass Christian, just say, hey, we're with you. Our prayers are with you. We'll do whatever we can to help you. But you know, your support is, believe me, is so vital. We are in this for a long, long time. We've just barely begun repairing. We're finally getting into we're finally finishing up you might say the cleanup stage, and we're going to get into rebuilding pretty darn soon. I want to give you another little perspective. In our town, our city engineer estimated that we had something like 2 million cubic yards of debris. And with the children at the school, I try to put that in some kind of measure that we as humans can understand other than engineers. And what that means is 2 million cubic yards is 2 football fields end-to-end stacked 200 feet high. And that's the quantity of debris that's just in our town alone. And we're a portion of the entire coast. So it's a tremendous job. And I say any support you can offer, including your prayers and your good wishes, are going to be most welcome. So, but I must applaud your city. You have a wonderful city here. Our visit has been, I mean, just absolutely outstanding. We couldn't be treated any better than we were. You have a beautiful city here. We hope that one day we're going to look like you. And then when we are, we'll invite you down, and I think you'll be pleased with what we have. I'll accept your magnificent quarters here. They may not be this plush. But anyway, but thank you all again for everything you've done for us.
Thank you, Lou, and thank you, Wilma. Appreciate it. Brings us to our next item on the agenda, which is reports to council, and we do have a status report on Arguello Park, I believe, by our city engineer, public works director, Parviz Mukhtari.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you have the staff report. I'd like to just add that the items listed to be done, contractor is working on it, And we have scheduled the final inspection and walkthrough for this Thursday, and we anticipate that we will open the park shortly after that inspection, which is Thursday. Probably within a week or no more than 10 days after that inspection, park will be open.
Okay. Council, do we have any questions for Mr. Mukhtari? I just have one question, and it just in terms of in the future, I was looking at the dollar figures that this is for not getting the work done on time, and might we want to look at that figure? I think it's works out to about $100 a day.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think if there had been anything higher than that, it might have been an impetus to get the work done on time? Or
This is not a penalty. What it's called is the liquidated damages.
Okay.
And when you try to collect it, you have to be able to show the city, actually the cost the city that much per day. And a project like a park is very difficult. It could have been $150, maybe $175, but anything more than that, to be able to prove it costs the city that much per day, and a project like this is difficult. A highway project, a street project is a lot easier. So, yeah, I think that probably should have been about 150 rather than 100.
Okay. And Barry, is there anything that you could add to that, or not really? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you.
Parviz. That brings us to item 6A, which is a proclamation presentation to Andy O'Connor, Troop 321, upon completion of his Eagle Scout Award. Do you want to come to the podium down here? Hello, Andy. Matt Brokat, the mayor. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your project first, and after you've done that, I'll hand you your proclamation. Does that work for you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
My project was helping Lucille Packard Children's Hospital by collecting new and used CDs and DVDs for kids, for patients that have to stay long-term after long-term surgeries. And I came up with this project because I've spent so much time in the hospital, and it gave me, I wanted to give back to the hospital, so that's why I did this project.
I want to read this, if you don't mind. It says, whereas the Boy Scouts of America is a character-building organization composed of young men who are seeking to prepare themselves as better leaders and citizens for tomorrow by developing those traits and strengths of character of all people, and whereas Scouting plays a vital force in the lives of many hundreds of boys in the city of San Carlos who are guided by a great many adult volunteers and who have given generously of their time and talents, and whereas the special and unique honor of achieving the highest award in Scouting has been earned by Andy O'Connor of Troop 321, I therefore, Matt Brokat, Mayor of the City of San Carlos, hereby congratulate Andy O'Connor. And Andy, I just want to add, I think it's great that you took something from an experience in your life and from your perspective and gave back to the community in the way that you did. Thank you very much. Well, it's hard to follow that. Our next item on the agenda is public comment, and we do have one speaker card for that with Pat Bell, please. And while Pat's going up, I'll just remind everybody that public comment is for addressing the council for items that are not on the posted agenda, and it's a 10 minutes that we give for that. Thank you, Pat.
Well, since I can't talk about something that's already on the agenda, I'm going to speak in broad terms and trust you guys to figure it out. I recall that Mayor Grocott voted against the pet store, whatever that pet store is that's coming in by Albertsons, because it might take away from Bow Wow. And I think that we need to listen to our merchants when they come before you and say, hey, you know, we're being taken over here. I think it's important to support the merchants we already have in town, not to mention Laurel Street, understand. Oh. And if it costs $300 to hang a banner over Laurel Street, can't we justify $300 a day for the guy being late? I mean, this is an expensive city. It costs $300 to hang a banner. It'd be easy to come up with $300.
Thank you, Pat. That brings us to item 8, which is approval of the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine in nature and will be enacted by one motion unless a council member or someone from the public would like to have something considered separately. And I do not see anybody wishing to consider anything separately, I don't think. Council members? Oh, you did. Okay, I'm sorry. Item 8E? E. Item 8E, okay. And I would actually like to have considered separately items J and K.
I would move approval of consent calendar items 8A through D. Item 8F, which is an adoption of ordinance number 1372, amending the San Carlos Municipal Code, sections 5.40 massage, 8.16 alarms and temporary parking, 10.62. Consent calendar items 8G through I, L, and M.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilmember Doherty and seconded by Vice Mayor Davids. I won't go through those various items again. Roll call.
Councilmember Teagle Doherty?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes. Okay, item 8E is adoption of...
Excuse me.
Point of order, yes.
Go ahead, Tom.
Are we going to follow the rules of last week where we're going to put these to the end of the agenda?
Oh, well, let's ask the city manager. Are we ready to do that procedure?
I mean, I think that would be the appropriate thing. If Ms. Bell would like to speak to this item, you may want to take her testimony before, if she has to leave at a later time. But I think moving these to the end of the business calendars and considering them separately is the appropriate action, yes.
Okay, so we will be moving these items, item 8E, J, and K to 10, after 10B. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And I take it Pat does not want to speak on that. So we will move on. Okay. So we'll come back to those items later in the meeting.
A point of order.
Yes.
Since the one speaker left and chose not to speak, should we approve the item right now? Or she may come back? Okay.
I think you're better off just putting it at the end of the agenda the way we talked about.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. That brings us to item 9A, which is a discussion by council of reconsidering one or more of the actions taken at the May 8th, 2006 City Council meeting, which provided direction to staff regarding athletic field improvements. I do have a number of speaker cards, and I thought it would probably be most appropriate to take these speakers before we open it up to discussion by the council.
Actually, Matt, if I can maybe make a slightly different option to consider. It seems to me, since I was the one that brought this up and we had 3 of the council members, just to clarify that what we're doing tonight is having a discussion about potentially reconsidering one or more of the actions taken in advance. Many of us have received emails regarding that saying, come on, make up your mind. Please keep in mind that what we did at our May 8th council meeting was simply give direction to staff. That's all we did. We did not take a vote to not consider turf at a future time at a future meeting. We did not make take any action that would preclude any one of these items from being changed at any time in the future. We simply gave direction to staff as a way to move forward to explore some of the options that we gave them. Since that time, I've also spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it seemed to me that the process of our May 8th meeting was in some ways flawed because of the way we went through the issues. And at the very end, when we got down to I think the most important issue of all was, do we want to consider all-weather turf? Do we really have as an objective as a city council the desire to increase participation, if that indeed is the desire, or at least support current levels of participation, that we reconsider the direction that was given to staff about the idea about considering Terra Linda and Central. And that was the purpose of my request at the last council meeting to put this on. So I appreciate everyone coming out this evening. However, this is simply a discussion about whether or not we're going to reconsider any of these. We've listened to all of the testimony. We certainly appreciate both sides of the issue, and it's a very difficult issue for all of us. So maybe with that preface, we'll go to public comment. But again, please keep in mind the discussion tonight is simply to really understand whether or not we want to reconsider, as a council, reconsider any of the direction that was given to staff at the May 8th council meeting.
Okay, and before we go into public comment on this, and by the way, I have 13 speaker cards, and our tradition has always been to allow speakers 2 minutes. At the last meeting, when we heard on this issue, we had the 2-minute rule. A number of people, when they got into their last paragraph, or sometimes their last sentence, if they were kind, would keep speaking after their 2 minutes were up. Tonight, I'll use this. We have to stay to those 2 minutes, and I'll give a light tap just so you know your 2 minutes is up. If you keep speaking, I might use it a little bit more aggressively. I hope not to, but I may have to. But we do want to keep this to some order and to keep each of the speakers to 2 minutes. It's only fair to do so, because some people use their 2 minutes and stop at that time, and others have carried on at times. So, yes, thank you. Yeah. The other thing I'd like to point out is when someone is finished speaking, if we have clapping after every speaker or any kind of noise or such showing either approval or disapproval of what was said, it just adds to the time and causes things to drag on longer than necessary. So if you could refrain from that as well. This is not a sporting event. The last thing I'd like to just remind folks of is the action that we did take, at least in general terms. We talked about whether or not to sell any land to fund the turf at any of the sites that we might choose, and we decided not to sell any land for funding. We did keep Crestview in play as a possibility for a trade for some other parcel that might come up. That's probably a remote chance, but it's something that we wanted to leave open. We then talked about whether to install lights in tandem with any of the turf projects that we might do, and it was decided we would not install lights at any of the projects at this under consideration at this time. Then we talked in generalities about whether to use turf at any location in San Carlos, given the pros and cons of it, and we decided, I believe that vote was 5-0, to use turf at some site, and that left us with the decision of where to use artificial turf, and we decided to not use it at Highlands, to not use it at Heather, and to use it at Central Middle School and at Tierra Linda, and then we asked staff to take all those decisions and put them into some consideration for us to look at again. And so that's where we had left it at the May 8th meeting before we were asked to reconsider. The last thing I'll say is when you get up to speak, make your points. If you've heard someone else make your points for you and sort of steal your thunder, you might want to consider not using your time. But certainly we'll leave that up to the speaker. With that, I will again announce 2 speakers. The first one, to come up, and then the person to follow. And if you could try and queue up as orderly as possible, that would be helpful as well. So our first speaker is Margaret Warren, and followed by Patricia Walsh.
Margaret Warren. I live on Hewitt Drive. No doubt I'm impacted by whatever decision is made, but I'm particularly impacted when I don't understand and I sent an email to all of you today, what I call a do-over. It's a child's phrase, and it was something I expected out of children, not out of city council. Having spent 10 years on a planning commission and active in South San Francisco politics and very familiar with Robert's Rules of Order and parliamentary procedure, this was not what I would have expected out of the city of Good Living. It surprised me. Specifically, organizations can't move forward if they are constantly revisiting the past. You learn from history in order to move forward, but you don't keep repeating yourself over and over. You start to move forward, you start to plan. Without a dream, you can never achieve the dream. And if you don't plan for the dream, you're never going to get there. We, all of us, this city, need to have a dream for the youth, that they have the right place to play, not patchwork, not we'll fix it today, we'll use all our money in one place today, and leave nothing for tomorrow, and leave nothing for the rest of the community. And while we're at it, we'll impact everybody negatively. What we need to do is work cooperatively together. I was all set to go forward with a bond issue, try to put my 2 cents worth, my time, my effort, into a bond issue to fund something like this, just fund a sports complex. I'll bet this city would do it. But we keep going backwards. And I just expected more, and I would hope that you won't do that. I hope that you will continue to move forward and not go backwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Patricia Walsh, followed by Chris Hawkins.
The preceding speaker couldn't have said it better, so I'll say ditto. But in addition to that, I'd like to point out this issue has been going on for 4 years, and you need to be committed to move forward. If the process is flawed, as I heard a council member say, then I think the process needs to be fixed, and you do need to look at following Robert's Rules of Order, or you need to agree on a process where you can stay committed to the vote that you have taken. I couldn't have heard two more different things. One council member say the only vote we took was to give direction to our staff, and the other vote apparently having been, at least the other version being, we took a vote and we decided not to put grass in at Highlands. I'm just wondering, were you both at the same meeting? I think that there should not be a do-over vote. I think you needed to decide what was decided and not revisit it. If the process is flawed, was it flawed just because some of you didn't get the result that you were seeking? That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Chris Hawkins, followed by Ann Tang.
Good evening, and thanks for hearing me out. I stood in this place when the Parks and Rec Commission meeting happened, and I will say the exact same thing I said then. Why am I here? I am appalled that I actually have to be here fighting for this issue again. I know the issue really right now is whether we put it on the agenda or not, and I think there's plenty of protocol and issues around Robert's Rules of Order, whatever you want to say, that put my confidence in this council a bit at jeopardy. However, my main issue here is we have to do something to preserve our natural spaces. This is a 21st century. It's not take me out to the ballpark anymore. It's the times they are a-changing. And we've got issues like parks, and we've got issues like athletic sports complexes, which have come up in the last few years, competitive soccer, more organized sports for kids. This is all great. But it is no longer a natural park. It is no longer what the word park meant to our park forefathers, to put artificial turf with fences all around it. I know you've heard this before, but I have to reiterate it again. You don't know what you got till it's gone. Let's not pave paradise with a turf lot, okay? That's all I want to say. Let's please work together. I, for one, will help anybody on the soccer teams, anybody who wants to put in motion a referendum, a bond issue, whatever, to support the athletic fields and the sports complexes. I've never been involved in that before in terms of the sports issues, but I would do it. I would pay my money out of my pocket to keep our natural spaces natural, because that's why I live here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Ann Tang, followed by Andrew Binstock.
I missed the last long meeting because I was out of town, but I'd like to state that I agree with the decisions that you made. I walked away feeling like you could balance the needs of the city for open space and the needs for sports. I think there's a huge opportunity to do something like a bond issue or another parcel tax to fund a sports complex. I think there probably is support in this community to do it. They've supported Measure G, and I think with their kids they would support this as well. And I think that our objective is not to pave over our parks. And artificial turf doesn't belong in the parks. It does have a role in schools, and putting it in the schools potentially creates an environment that, and a park that the kids currently do not have, and usage the kids do not have, and it expands the hours that the children of our community get to use those parks. So I think revisiting this at this point, we need to move forward. We can't keep going backwards, otherwise we will never get anything done.
Thank you, Ann. Andrew Binstock, followed by Greg Harris.
Andrew Binstock, San Carlos. I don't want to address the nature of the issue that we're reconsidering. I want to address the reconsideration itself. I think good government dictates that when you take a vote, you stand by the vote. If there are procedural flaws in the system, you address the procedural. You're discontent with the procedures prior to the vote. Once the vote is taken, the vote needs to be finalized. There needs to be integrity to government decisions. It is very difficult for people to transact business with the government if 3-2 votes are subject to review and reconsideration simply by saying that it's not a final vote but a direction to staff. A direction to staff is actually an executive decision. You're asking staff to begin to implement policy. And so if in fact it's not a final vote, then the recommendation to staff should proceed forward, and the matters that are outstanding should be brought up at the final vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Greg Harris, followed by Bonnie Houston? Haviston? Howitson. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, when I listened to the discussion last Monday night, there were two reasons given for why we should put this back on the agenda. One was we didn't give careful enough consideration to the topic the first time, and the second one was we needed more data, and I think both of those rationales are flawed. We've had 3 committees over 3 years. We've had 2 Parks and Rec Commission meetings, each over 4 hours, to consider this topic. There have been 3 long reports. There have been 2 long city council meetings, 6 hours of public testimony, and over 2 hours of city council deliberation. We have considered this topic. We as a community have done our homework, and we ask you as a city council to keep up with us, to follow the facts, and to make crisp decisions so that we can move on. The topic of do we have enough information, there was a request for more information to be able to measure the benefit of different scenarios. The Fields Committee looked at this, and the Fields Committee couldn't come to any agreement on a way to measure this scenario. There was neither a recommendation from staff nor from the majority report, and so there is no more data out there. You can't just ask for more data. After 3 years, trust me, you have all the data that exists on this topic. So with plenty of time to consider, with plenty of data at your fingertips, it leaves me with only one conclusion. The only reason I can conclude that we're still talking about this is that there were a small handful of angry voices after last week's meeting. It's those angry voices that are putting this topic back on the agenda, and that's not a way to run a government with the voices of a few angry voices. And so I encourage you to begin the healing tonight. This is a topic where individuals within the majority declared war in San Carlos. I'd be happy to show you the emails. This has divided neighborhoods, and we need you to begin that healing process. It's time to stick to your decision, to move forward. It's time to begin taking action and stop discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Bonnie? And sorry for butchering your last name.
That's all right. Hey,
and let me give the next speaker before you get going there. Daniel Huerta.
Richard Wachter has to leave and was asking if he could swap with me.
What's his name?
Richard
Wachter.
Okay, I'll find you here.
Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
And then
Yeah.
do you want me to go right after him, or do you?
Yeah, why not? Let's not do this over and over again, folks, but yeah, we'll allow it.
I got to go play ball on natural surface.
Okay.
If that's okay, I do have one for each of you, but I need one of them that I'm going to be referring to. I'm Richard Wachter, and I live on Glasgow Lane. 16 years. I've been in San Carlos since 1975. Council members, I am disappointed that our city council agreed to place on a future agenda discussion of reconsidering actions taken at a city council meeting on May 8th, actions that are now being second-guessed, where already a verdict has been reached. Direction by City Council was justly provided to staff regarding athletic field improvements. The epitome of contradiction is whereby Inga claims that our City Council didn't sufficiently consider this issue. Inga was loud and clear at our May 8th council meeting when she publicly professed that she had thoroughly completed all necessary research and had read all related materials on this issue. Inga further broadcasted that she took the time to view and listen to a video of our entire April 10th council meeting, including numerous presentations by concerned San Carlos residents. Inga's total disregard as to the recommendation of our Parks and Recreation Commission comes across as a red flag. The commission was specifically appointed by City Council to function as an authority on parks. Parks include playing fields, playgrounds, and recreational areas. At our May 8th City Council meeting, Inga suggested coaches simply pull our children off synthetic turf fields on days when temperatures became too warm. What baffles me is why the fuss with closing fields on days when they're too wet. Seems like a trade-off with absolutely no benefit. In reality, San Carlos probably contends with more days that are too warm rather than too wet. Your May 8th decision surely benefits our entire community. That's why I was so perplexed by an editorial appearing May 10th in the Daily Journal proclaiming no one wins in the turf compromise.
That's it. Thank you.
And I left the rest there for you. If I can just end by stating that
That's fine.
I am definitely outraged.
Okay, Bonnie, followed by Danielle, and we'll be back on order. By the way, Bonnie, if I may interject before you speak.
Sure.
We up here have made an agreement, if you will, as a matter of decorum to address each other as much as possible as council member and mayor and so forth. And I would appreciate it in your public comments if you would address us in the same manner. We are at a council meeting. Thank you.
Bonnie Howitson, 56 Sequoia Court. I'm speaking tonight with regards to re-agendizing the synthetic turf debate. I know you are aware of how divisive this issue has been to our community, which is why I can't understand why you would consider rehashing this debate over again. I represent a large group of San Carlos residents who object to the sale of open space and/or parkland to fund synthetic turf or any project for that matter. We turned out in force on the February 1st Parks and Rec Commission meeting. Your Parks and Recs Commission overwhelmingly was against the sale of open space to fund this project. Please remember the following. Chilton Park and Crestview property both would need to be put to the people's vote in order to sell them, which, as you know, is very costly. Second, even if the people's vote passed in favor of selling these properties, a developer would have a very hard time developing them. The development of Chilton Park in particular would have many expensive developmental problems, which include, and are not limited to, expensive EIRs, narrow streets, and lack of emergency access. The Crestview property should be developed into a park as the city general plan requires. This would create more parkland and potentially another field, which would not only increase the amount of parkland the city currently has and needs, but would add another field to our inventory, which would increase playing hours, a win-win. When deciding to move forward, I ask that you look at the city's needs as a whole and prioritize them. Installing synthetic turf is a very expensive proposition in a time where the city has limited funds. I think I can speak for most San Carlos residents when I say I'd rather have emergency services than a field that can be played on 365 days out of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Again, if we can refrain from clapping, it only takes away from our time. Daniel Huerta, followed by Jeff Klein.
Hi, my name is Danielle Huerta. I live at 205 Glasgow Lane. And I wanted to say that I was so pleased by the City Council decisions of May 8th, especially for the addition of upgrading Highlands Field with new grass, which I think will increase the amount of playable hours on that field and perhaps the amount of teams that can be on there. And while as a resident I prefer that we stick with the current level of traffic, I fully support the idea of increasing the playtime at Highlands through new grass. And I think that the Council's commitment to youth sports by asking staff to investigate upgrading 5 fields, the 2 at Tierra Linda and the 3 others, is a tremendous investment in youth sports. And I would like to see the Council reaffirm that decision by deciding not to revisit this issue. We've had at least 3 years of a very divisive issue within our community, and I really think we're at the point where we need to start going forward in some direction towards increasing playable hours without unduly impacting the community. Finally, without compelling new evidence since the May 8th meeting, I don't see any compelling reason to revisit this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jeff Klein, followed by Esther Klein.
Jeff Klein, 112 Dundee Lane. I was very concerned about putting this item back on the agenda. Everyone had said how prepared they were, that they've read a lot of material, that we've heard a lot of speakers, and it really does just seem like someone wasn't happy with the decision that was made. What new data could have come up between the 2 council meetings? I did read that there was a lawsuit and that the city's being sued by AYSO Belmont. And
Say so.
What's that?
Say so, not AYSO.
Oh, Say so, sorry.
Yes.
And I heard it promptly dismissed, I think, by a city official as being somewhat irrelevant, and I'm just wondering if this was maybe part of the reason that changed City Council or wanting to reconsider their decision. But I think that type of lawsuit, I mean, there would certainly be other lawsuits no matter what decision was made. Someone said at the last City Council meeting that they're just punting the problem to TL, and that we haven't heard from the TL folks yet. I have not heard anyone speak from the TL neighborhood on this issue, and I think part of it is that the field at TL has a very large buffer between the field and the neighborhood. So they were people from the TL neighborhood were invited to participate in the Citizens Field Committee, and no one from TL neighborhood was on that committee. I've never heard anyone from TL speak at the Parks and Rec Commission meeting. I think that neighborhood is not going to be impacted the way other neighborhoods would be, and that's why it's not just punting to TL. It's actually a place that's not going to disturb neighbors. There's plenty of parking at TL. There's a lot of issues why TL is a good choice.
Thank you. Esther? Esther Klein, followed by Heidi Krohn.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us this time to provide public comment on this. I'd ask the council not to reopen this divisive issue after so many hours of debate and discussion. The city is not a one-issue city. You have a lot of important issues to decide on, and you're devoting so much time redeciding an issue that has been decided and discussed. There are many civic-minded San Carlins who would like to devote their time and energy towards building a sports complex for our city, who now may have to redirect their energy back into deciding this issue. I know I would personally be glad to walk the streets of the precincts to support building a sports complex. I personally did not agree with every decision. I personally am not a fan of artificial grass. I would have liked to have seen improvements everywhere, all being grass. And I also am a neighbor in the Highlands Park community, and I would have liked to seen the same grass stay there rather than increase participation and where the neighborhood really can't handle it. But the decision was made, and I accepted it, and I feel that it's important to move on. Also, I think in the decision between what I've heard and some people say, is it comes down to whether we want to improve middle schools or help an outside sports organization. And if we really want to help the children of this community, all of them, not just those whose parents can know about these other avenues and sign their children up and have time to volunteer. There are a lot of children whose parents both might be working, don't know what's going on, and really the middle schools provide the opportunity of providing the sports, and so that there isn't a problem with being overweight in our children. And the philosophy of our public education system is better served by improving the quality of those fields. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Heidi Krohn, followed by Bill Rosenberg.
Hello, City Council. I am a 10-year volunteer with the Girl Scouts, and actually this evening I should be with Linda Tuchel planning our activities at day camp this summer. That meeting's going on right now. But I did want to come here and speak here. I personally was impressed by the way you ran the meeting on May 8th and on April 10th. I think that it was conducted in the smoothest way that I've seen a public meeting of that kind of size run. And I think that there was at that meeting a great focus on participation. I can remember Mr. Lewis speaking strongly about that. That was a goal of the council and San Carlos to increase participation in sports. We've had 3 years of committees, 3 different committees. We've had multiple reports, over 10 hours of public discussion on this issue. And I think that the solutions, the decisions that were made at the last council meeting, while they may not have made everyone totally happy, I think were probably the most fair, best compromise that one could reach. And to say that there wasn't enough consideration, I believe is really kind of tantamount to saying that you weren't prepared to make that decision. And I think that we need to move forward from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bill Rosenberg, followed by Barry Johnson.
Hi, Bill Rosenberg, Heather Neighbors. Let's move forward with a long-term plan to truly solve the sports participation shortage, and let's not reopen the discussion of May 8th. Billboards, San Carlos United, and planning. You could be home by now. You know that billboard, the downtown apartment complex, you don't have to sit in rush hour commute, you could already be home right now. Well, that's where we are now. We could have sports fields by now. If the thousands of hours and thousands of dollars that have gone into this confrontational process have been invested in building unity through a successful planning process, we could have lots of sports fields available or under construction already. When you've looked out at your audience over the past few meetings, have you seen San Carlos United? It's a great name for a soccer team, but it's also a great description for the best that this community can be, and 28,000 people gave you the power to be the ones to make San Carlos United tonight. And I don't think that's what you've seen. I think you've seen two sides of an aisle, a sea of bright yellow buttons with big no written all over it, and yet I've talked to probably 100 Heather and Highlands neighbors, and I've heard exactly one comment in 2 years that was the slightest bit disparaging about soccer or sports. I don't want to be wearing a no button about sports. I think all these people want to be wearing yes to sports buttons. This doesn't have to be a fight where one side wins. When the audience left the May 8th council meeting, they were San Carlos United. We were all ready to move forward united with a well-managed planning process that would find adequate facilities to meet the needs of adults and youth sports. And instead, we're still polarized, losing more time fighting over an issue that can't possibly have a good outcome for the community. And that leaves you in a position tonight to choose. Do we have to continue to choose sides, or can we move forward San Carlos United? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Barry, followed by Ben Tang.
Good evening, members of the council. I'm Barry Johnson of San Carlos. I'm also an assistant scoutmaster for Troop 321, so unlike Heidi, I get a twofer tonight because I was here to support Andy O'Connor, and I really wish that you had the opportunity to know him. He is a fine man. I hope he decides to stay here for the rest of his life. Everybody else before me has said what I wanted to say far more eloquently, so I do have one thing to say, though, that's kind of a repetition, and that is I'm not aware of any new data or new information that became available after your last decision, and so it leaves me wondering why, and maybe a little distrustful, and that's not a good feeling to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ben Tang, followed by Margot Donahue.
All right.
Yes.
I wanted to applaud all of the efforts of the City Council, the meetings that have gone on, the patience, the review of all the facts, and the decision-making process was incredible. So thank you. Secondarily to that, as we as adults and parents, as we want to provide sports facilities for our children, we also want to provide good examples for our children. So one of the things that we do, I think, as older parents and adults is when we meet a new parent, we say, hey, you make rules for your children, you make decisions when they say, Mommy, can I do that, or Daddy, can I do that, and you stick with it. You make decisions and you go on, and it's time for us to go on. So as everyone else has said, I'm encouraged by the decision-making process. I hope that we can move forward with a bond issue or something appropriate to fund our sports needs so we can really, truly unite as a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Margot Donahue, followed by Karen Molinari.
Thank you. I feel like we're facing double jeopardy here. You know, a decision has been made and we're revisiting again. You know, certainly applaud, you know, what we've been doing so far, but here we are yet again. I've spent a lot of hours, as many of the homeowners here have spent over the years, talking to a lot of people, and we're here yet again, and it feels like, you know, we're revisiting something that is going to keep getting revisited again. There was a party to celebrate, and we're like, do we celebrate or do we not celebrate because we don't think it's ending, and yet it was a week before we're here again, and it's frustrating to us, and I'm wondering, what is it going to take? I spent countless hours handing out flyers, knocking on doors, seeing people not really understanding what the issue was. I spent 3 hours at a farmer's market getting hoarse, talking to people, helping them understand the issues. Most of those people didn't even know what the issues were. I'm wondering what it's going to take the next time. Is it going to take knocking on thousands of doors, going to farmers markets every weekend to help get this issue? This time, getting it signed, getting it on a ballot. Maybe, I know Mayor Gurkhat, you said it's not a democracy. Do we make it a democracy this time? I mean, it's pretty frustrating. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I've sent all of you guys emails, countless emails, volunteering, saying, I am happy to get on a fundraising committee to make what is right for this great city. It's a sports complex. This is a camel's nose under the tent. Let's not deny this. It is a sports complex we are talking about here, and that's what it's going to take to make this thing right. So whether it's up at Highlands, at Heather, wherever it's going to be, it's a sports complex that this city needs. And the thing that's going to make this right is for us all to band together and do a fundraising committee, because Councilwoman Doherty, you're right. We don't have the money. We need to get a fundraising committee together to make what's right and get a sports complex here. And it's not up there in the hills that's going to make it right. And I'm happy to help and volunteer to get it together.
Thank you. Karen Molinari, followed by Tom Johnstone.
Dear Mayor and Council members, thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to you. While I appreciate the decision to reconsider this issue, I'm disappointed that you as a council moved forward with a vote if you weren't prepared on May 8th. And I think it would have been simpler to say then at that time, I need more information. Having spent many years working for public servants such as yourselves, I have to say that it's this type of reconsideration that is what leads to voter apathy and an electorate that feels disenfranchised. You heard so loud and clearly from, so many residents on both sides of the aisle. And I really want to echo what other people have said earlier tonight. Tonight's the time to bring everybody together and move us forward as a community and not a divisive group. I really want to encourage you to push the creation of a master plan. I think that is critical for a community of our size that's dealing with the issues we're faced with. And I just want to quote another elected official, that if you fail to plan, you ultimately plan to fail. And let's not do that. Let's plan to be a success with our community, and let's band together and support both our parks and our sports organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Tom Johnstone, and he will be followed by Tracy Papoon.
Hello, friends. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be at the last meeting. I got to spend my time in Yosemite with 140 junior high kids. I wouldn't have said what I wanted to say tonight, but I want to relate. I went through the same thing at our Park and Rec Commission meeting, which was packed, just like your meetings have been. And when we got all done, we couldn't make a decision, and I switched my vote. I spent the next 2 weeks apologizing, but the interesting thing was, by 7 o'clock the next morning, I had realized I'd made a horrible mistake. And so, Inga, I want to congratulate you. I might be the only one in the room. But sometimes you did something wrong. And maybe you don't think you did something wrong, but I knew at the Parks and Rec Commission meeting when I voted for Tara Linda, against the advice of the city staff that we pay, which is supposed to know something, I didn't listen. I didn't take it all in, and I totally understood that I'd made a mistake. At that point, it was too late. So I want to say to the commissioners, or to my council members, that had the guts to stand up and say, maybe we made a mistake, maybe you didn't, but at least you're considering it, and that takes guts, and I applaud you for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Tracy, followed by Kristen Wilshire.
Hello. Reading from a receipt. I went away on a business trip and came back to a flurry of emails that we were revisiting this issue again, so please excuse me if I stumble along because I can't read my writing. I'm confused because I don't understand this morbid fascination that we're once again revisiting on destroying the quality of life that the City of Good Living promises so many people. City Council heard all these arguments, and you voted on a win-win solution for everyone. It served the sports interests. It served those of us who've turned into rabid tree huggers that wanted to preserve the grass. And I'm not sure why we're back to the discussion potentially of AstroTurf or bust. So I guess it begs the question, are we going to continue to roll the dice over and over again until special interest sports groups see their interests served? So what about the rest of us? You don't hear very many sports groups in San Carlos crying foul that you didn't give us the AstroTurf we've been demanding every day with our tax dollars and our votes. So why are we still on this issue? it's going to drag out for years if you change your position and you take this back forward through more and more committees. And if you think that the litigation is going to stop as a result of it, it's not. There's going to be more litigation as residents who are outraged continue to take this forward. So I beg you to maintain the path that you guys have kept. You made a good decision, and I think that you should stand by it. Let's let this issue lie and let the rest of San Carlos begin to heal and work on the sports complex funding activities that several people have mentioned, so that we can start rebuilding our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our last speaker on this is Kristen Wilshire.
Hi. I heard that you were talking about putting turf into Central Middle School, and I go there, and I think that is a really bad idea, because even though our school tells all these boys not to, they still play tackle football. They'll fall on the grass, and you know how much falling hurts. Well, imagine falling on rubber, which is like even more, it hurts even more, especially when it's hot. And also, I don't think it will solve any problems, because my uncle has turf, which I don't like because it's a bad thing for the environment, but also there are real weeds growing in his fake grass. So, thank you.
Thank you. Michael, we have a few more cards coming up, so I thought Kristen was going to be our last, but we have Mike Blandino, and he is followed by Mike Ahern.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. I'm going to be one of the ones that speaks. Unfortunately, I see all the no signs, and I do want the city to heal. I've been a resident for a couple of years, but I've also been a recreation professional for over 20. I think one of the reasons I think you might be looking at this again, and I'm not 100% sure, but your city attorney did stand up in front of you that night and tell you you had no long-term agreement with the school district over TL. He advised that it wouldn't be a good idea to go forward with that idea. And the second thing is, and there was a long editorial in the paper about it, and what I'm here tonight to talk about is the impact on girls softball. Now, I've emailed 4 of the 5 of you about this issue, being the Northern California Junior Olympic Commissioner and looking over 12,000 girls. I am concerned that the girls over this decision could lose time on a field, because if you go and you turf TL, the schools are going to want to use it for their after-school programs, and instead of getting on that field at 3:30, they're going to be getting on at 5, 5:30, 6 o'clock. They're going to lose time. Now, maybe that's another reason you're looking at this, that these people out here either want to ignore or don't care. I have no dog in this fight. I've got 2 girls, they're 2 and 6. I don't know if they'll ever play sports. But I got 12,000 girls I look after as a Junior Olympic Commissioner. I will not see them lose any field time. I thank you for all 4 of you getting back to me that I emailed and saying that you will look out for the girls. Well, I will be here, and I will also look out for the girls along with girls softball, those 500 parents out there. I want a city united. I don't want to see anybody lose in this fight, and I certainly do not want to see the girls softball girls lose anything, including their playing time and their game time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Ahern.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. I can empathize with your decision to reconsider this. Must have been pretty difficult to have a room full of people on both sides, very passionate, giving you lots of new information week after week. And so I certainly understand the desire to think it through again. Having said that, I think that the key issues, I think you did a great job of summarizing a solution, right? Trying to find a balance. Some of the fields need some work, and you guys came up with a solution to apply some of the Measure G funds to improve Highlands and Heather, and not burn the whole amount on plastic turf in a place where it doesn't really belong. So I just wanted to be one more voice telling you that I would support and help raise funds for the ultimate solution, the right solution, which is a sports complex, some kind of new field. If you look at the analysis, putting plastic in one of these existing fields doesn't give us the return on our money, doesn't give us the new incremental hours that I think we really need. So I ask you to stick with something very similar to what you had proposed, and I wanted to express my support for the longer-term solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And by the way, just for the record, all these folks were from San Carlos. I didn't, ask people to necessarily state that, but I think it was understood, and so I just wanted to add that for the record. Okay, council. I think what we need to discuss here then is simply, do we want to take any of these issues, whether it be the issue of selling property, the issue of lights, the general issue of using artificial turf, and then location. Do we want to take any of these and have them reconsidered at a future council meeting? I would assume that, Mr. City Manager, would be our June 12th council meeting.
That would be the earliest that we could bring it back at a regular meeting, yes.
Okay, and do we have room on the agenda for that?
I think we can make room, yes.
We can make room. Okay. And so as we discuss whether to reconsider, I would just advise all of us that we can discuss why we may want to reconsider, but I do not think we should get into a discussion on the pros and cons of any particular site or any of the particular issues, because that is why we would have it on the agenda for the June 12th council meeting. But if you would like to weigh in on why you would like to reconsider, I think that's fair game. Okay, so it's now open for discussion.
So I made some notes this week, and I'd just like to hand some out real quick to the council to take a look at. And I don't know how deep we want to get into this. They're typed up, so they look formal, but these are effectively notes that I did in trying to just analyze the decision. And the reason that I think it warrants some consideration is because I see it as an extension of the discussion that we had the other night, in that we made a lot of individual decisions about individual fields and individual things. And this is primarily about the participation issue that I brought up and trying to measure participation. And the only thing I want to bring up for tonight is this is just as a reason to reconsider, to think about this, is if you look in the top part of this, and I apologize I don't have an overhead or anything, these are notes, and I'm happy to share them as we go forward. But this is just my analysis of this weekend, diving into the spreadsheet that staff had presented to us, the financial numbers that staff had given to us, and to look at our decision as an aggregate decision, not a bunch of individual decisions. And as you can see, using the figures that staff gave us, in our current decision, it warrants spending about $6.7 million, adding approximately 2,023 additional practice slots for teams served. If we reconsider a surface type or two, you can see in the alternatives that follow that it can be as much as little as $3.5 million to add more additional spaces with just a conversion of one field difference than our last decision was. It does also point out, which I was a little disappointed that we didn't give the majority report, just more discussion. This is a bit of a quantitative analysis. It's not necessarily a qualitative analysis, which is our greater burden here. But I just see if we look at our decision in aggregate, I mean, you can't see the majority report, although it's $4.4 million, it's a dramatic number of spaces. I'm not proclaiming any pro or con any position tonight. What I'm trying to say is that it looks like the decision we made in aggregate is by far the most expensive with the least amount of efficacy as far as increasing participation. And for that reason alone, I think it warrants a conversation as a continuance of the discussion to look at, are we really doing the right thing by spending this $6.7 million to add this amount of spaces, or could we potentially spend less? And given the fact that we have a structural deficit, I think it's a worthy consideration, and it's worthy to take this discussion to the next step, especially considering the fact that we have some restricted funding. So I would consider, I would like to see us consider talking about it as an extension of the decision that we made to continue to look at it as an aggregate group.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Anyone else? So, Brad, what you're, as far as the breakdown is concerned, it looks like what your notes are about is simply location for artificial turf, and you know, bearing in mind that we gave direction to reconstruct some fields in natural turf as well. But you're not asking us to reconsider the sale of property or installation of lights. You're just asking us to reconsider primarily location and where we might use
how much money we spend and how effective toward increased participation. And another key ingredient that came up in my analysis this weekend is, do we expand a facility? We have many facilities that are U8 only, U10 only, or all ages. And it also, in our decision, we make the least amount, it's not as effective as it could be toward taking facilities and expanding the age group range by which can utilize that facility.
The only thing I would add to what you have here, just looking at it very quickly and also listening to what you commented on, is I see a little bit here, but not a lot of consideration of softball, and I think that needs to be considered. If we're going to discuss this again, one of the criticisms we received was not considering softball enough in the schedule. I see a little bit here, but I think
in fact, it was the trickiest part of this whole analysis. So if I can respond to that, the girls softball issue is really important because, oddly enough, when you look at it as a synthetic turf, according to participation numbers, not giving access before 5 p.m., at first glance, it looks as though there's not a lot of effect on the total amount of practice and teams served on that field. But when you look a little bit farther into it, what happens is in that 3:30 slot, that 3:30 to 5 o'clock slot, girls softball loses 124 practice slots, and which is another reason to look at this in aggregate. When I talked to Kevin Holden, who was on the Fields Committee, one of the points that he brought up is he's not necessarily, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to speak for Kevin, but his feeling was that unless we did something at one of the other facilities to open up and expand that to all ages and expand participation, it would hurt girls softball. And indeed, in this current one, it does, because we don't increase the other facilities to the extent that it can accommodate that overflow of girls softball, which deserves equal access to the fields as anything else does. So what this shows, and I've got, again, this is intended to be my notes of analysis that should go to staff, and in my opinion is we can work with staff to see, give these ranges and give these some veracity. My only point is when you look at it in aggregate, there is a problem with the girls softball right now in the current decision, which is another reason why I think we should consider it. And I just want to say I am sensitive to
Brad, I just want to clarify that. I think there's a perceived problem with girls softball. It's to be debated whether or not there is a problem, but we're not here to now discuss that debate.
From my analysis, it shows that, but that's fine. I am sensitive to reconsidering it, but I'm also sensitive to making the right decision, and that's what I'm dedicated to.
Okay, thank you. Very well done.
Councilman Lewis, I appreciate getting all this information. And, you know, anytime anybody gives me numbers, it's just like giving a lawyer a letter. You know, they're going to go, well, what about this? What about this? And this is no criticism of your time, and believe me, I know this didn't take 5 minutes to put together. On the first part of your notes up here, you have the current one, and you have some dollars listed against TL Upper and Central Turf. In other words, you have some numbers there, 1.5 and 1.3. but on the other three alternatives, you don't have any dollars. And I'm a little confused, because wouldn't those also have dollars with them if they were going to all match up, or then we should take away the 2.8 from the top and take away the additional slots? I'm confused. I just didn't know if we should add on these other slots down at the bottom if we put synthetic turf. I was just trying to make apples.
No, I appreciate that. The reason I left those off is by dealing with just 3 fields instead of 5 fields, we can increase the participation. So one of the things to reconsider is, do we really need to consider 5 fields as opposed to 3?
I see your point, and I would go one way or the other with that, because to me, to look at apples and apples, you would almost have to take out TL upper and central turf, the dollars on the upper one, and then you would be able to compare, either add them or subtract them, and then you'd be able to compare all the parts.
That's a fair point. If we did that, there'd be 1,000 less slots open in scenario number 1.
And again, I'm just trying to understand the notes that you just made.
One of the problems with looking at your notes now is you have a copy and we have a copy here, and there's 2 out here. But
yeah, and I would actually,
if there's a staff report, we're supposed to provide it to the audience.
And that's
so
why
I think we have a problem with using that as a reference for the discussion at this point in time, unless we want to make copies and hand them all out.
No, and we really don't. I think Brad's intent here was to give us some information that would say that this, at least coming from his perspective, is why we may want to revisit the issue without us getting into the details of what he has here, because, again, you're correct, Mr. City Attorney, that it is unfair to the audience to discuss this in detail when they do not have copies.
So perhaps I can jump in actually and bring this actually up to a little bit higher level in terms of, I know I've gotten some criticism about one.
Councilmember Doherty, we're not on a higher level. This is the highest level you can get.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of the do-over, first of all, I just want to make it very clear, this is not a do-over. This is asking for reconsideration of some direction that was given to staff. A do-over in the real sense of the word would be, you know what, when we closed down the El Camino median and we went back 2 years later and reopened it, that's a do-over. And we took the monetary hit for that because we had already done the construction. This is a council, or at least past councils have not been afraid to stand up here and say, you know what, maybe we made a mistake. And with my request at the last council meeting, at the time I had at least 3 council members that we all said, maybe this, because this is such a huge issue, maybe it's worthwhile taking a couple of additional hours. So there's been also some criticism about what information didn't I have, didn't I do my homework. Actually, I did, and I did a lot of homework. What I came out of our May 8th meeting feeling like is that, and I did say, maybe I've said it in public, I feel like we punted the issue, because what we as a council may have decided upon in terms of giving direction to staff may have been the best win-win solution, but guess what? It was not feasible. It may never happen. We don't even have any information from staff around whether or not we can actually fund any of that we came up with at the last meeting. So while on paper, everyone in this room, I think, went out of that meeting feeling very good about the decision that this council reached, my challenge to myself is, did we actually accomplish anything? And I don't have a fair sense that we did. And so my purpose for bringing it back is I would actually like to request that we ask staff to come back to us. I would like to understand for the different scenarios. And I kind of like Brad's approach, which is let's look at aggregate, because we did talk about assuming that we still have a goal of wanting to increase participation, whether it be through artificial or all-weather turf or natural grass. Let's confirm that that's indeed our goal, and then look at each one of the scenarios from the standpoint of a timing analysis. So, what would be the timing to, for example, work with the school districts to evaluate the opportunities potentially at TL or at Central. I'd like to have a funding analysis, which is really where can we use Measure G funds and in what timing. I know, Tom, you did
a quick on the back of your, sort of napkin kind of analysis that shows that there will be money available. So I just would like to understand what the restrictions are around using, for example, Measure G funds, whether or not we need to do some other things. And I applaud Brad's increase, going through and saying what each one of the slots starts to look like in terms of increased participation. I'd love to have staff for an opportunity to get that back to us and be able to do not only an apples-to-apples comparison, which I think is what Bob is asking for, but also sort of looking at it as, where do we get the most bang for the buck, I guess. I hope that's not too profane, Matt, but being able to get some understanding about for each one of the locations, sort of looking at it aggregate. And I think what I feel like we came out of the last meeting was, I mentioned, I put up the motion for looking at turf at Highlands. It died for a lack of a second. There was no discussion, just completely died. It then went next to Heather. And there was a second there, and there was a lot of other discussion. However, again, that died. And then by the time TL came up, it was like, well, wait a second, maybe we should go back and really look at all of these sites on a whole. I, for one, am not in favor of reopening or sort of discussing whether or not we sell or don't sell property. I think we had a fairly good consensus on that. I think we should probably not consider the ball lights or field lights at any of the locations. I'd like to keep that off the table if there's consensus for that. And I do very much support what a lot of you said, which is we need to develop a strategy and a master plan and a long-term solution. I know myself and other people in this room actually have sat on an alternative committee to try to look at where can we increase the amount of parkland here in San Carlos. And maybe, some people now are calling it a sports complex. I think that we really need to focus on a long-term vision, but at the same time not sell this city short by coming up with a solution or giving direction to staff that I feel at the end of the day would basically not provide any additional space. And so that's why I've requested that this be reconsidered. It certainly is not a do-over.
Please, let's cut the commentary. Bear with me while I just mark up my matrix here. No. Okay, we've heard from one side of the dais. Let's hear from the other.
Well, I'll weigh in terms of my preference at this point. I think we made a well-determined and a well-compromised decision. And I appreciate the fact that the sports people primarily were not in favor of that decision because it didn't give them the play time they wanted. And play time is very important to the sports people. But we live in a community where other things make a difference as well. And I think that if we hang everything on this decision on play hours and on cost per hour and on cost per field, we're making the wrong decision. We're too well focused on a small, perhaps not a small, but a very vocal part of our community that is looking to solve the problem very quickly. The way the problem gets solved is we build more fields. And the way we build more fields is to go out to the public, explain the problem, and get some money and do something about it. We've talked about Crestview North. That's a possibility. I think we have differences of opinion in terms of what that might cost or how extensive that may be, but it's certainly worth discussion. And we all know that the best solution for all is to do something in an area that's remote to neighborhoods where it wouldn't impact the living standards of people, but would give us the space we need. Now, granted, there is no space available for this at this point, but planning for it, soliciting funds for it, and getting behind it can make it happen. And that's what really solves the problem. I'm concerned with any change in Highlands and Heather. I'm concerned about the EIR ramifications of that process. I see this taking years. I see us in litigation forever. And as long as we're going down that road, and if I'm right, nothing's going to happen. No one's going to put money into a field that's going to come out. No one's going to put money into Highlands or Heather if that money is going to be wasted through some hoped-for artificial turf. And it may happen someday. And it may happen to a point where there's a limit on hours to where it doesn't make any difference whether it's artificial or whether it's natural. I just think we're going down the wrong path. We've seen the EIR process, especially at this level. We know how complicated it gets. And we begin to ask questions about turf relative to the EIR framework. We're looking at some mysterious things that are going to take a long time to get resolved and may never find an answer. And in the meantime, we're just churning the water and we're doing the best we can, but nothing happens. I think the council's decision to move ahead with grass at Heather and Highlands is good because it gives us good playing surfaces. It gives us first-class playing surfaces, and we can move on. The issue with Terra Linda, I think, is an open issue. But again, as we mentioned before, that can happen. The EIR process can happen at Terra Linda while we're playing on good fields up on Highlands and Heather. And ultimately, hopefully, we'll have something in that area. Been a lot of talk about how the girls' softball is going to get shorted. I don't think so. A lot of talk about we don't have an agreement with the school district. The school district has told us they're more than happy to talk agreements. I just don't see a roadblock in doing that, and I don't think that if we're all working together, the girls' softball will be compromised. So I come back to the point. I think our decision did what it could for everybody, didn't make everybody happy, but it came down on the side of a sensible solution for an obvious problem and allows us to move forward with the community united to bring us into the next phase, which is a additional play fields. So I stand on the direction that we gave staff. I'd argue a little bit with Inga in terms of direction versus decisions. I think these were decisions, and they were decisions that were passed on as direction. But be that as it may, if we revisit them, we revisit them. But I, for one, am pleased with what we did, and I think we did the right thing.
Thank you. Bob?
Well, I can see this in both sides because, first of all, from the philosophy of making a decision or a recommendation, we did that. If we go back, and it's been mentioned tonight by speakers, and again, it could be anything. It could be whether we're going to, any decision this council makes or any recommendation this council makes, it has to end somewhere. I don't know where that's going to be after tonight, but it has to end somewhere. If we continue to go back, and I'm, myself and Council Member Lewis are new to this process, although we've certainly made decisions in our lives, in our businesses and our personal lives, some of which we've gotten to make again, and some of which we've had to live with, some of which have been good, and some of which perhaps may not have been. But I am concerned with the fact of giving the public the situation that, well, they did it there, and maybe we can redo, or if not, I apologize, not use that term, but perhaps we can have another hearing on this item again. And I wanted to hear from my fellow council members tonight, because I was one of the three last time to say, what other information do we have to talk about? When we made the decision on May 8th, and I'll be quite candid about it, and the votes are there and the city clerk has them, I was in complete agreement with the fact that we decided not to sell the properties. I was in complete agreement with the fact that we all thought about synthetic surface in some process, and I was in complete agreement that I felt there should be no lights on any of these additional fields. So for me, those were three ones, and I said, okay, everybody seemed to be on the same page, at least in my mind. Relative to the alternatives, I didn't necessarily come up with the same one. What was finally decided was not my first choice. If truth be known, when I wrote down my choices, and there were 3 or 4 of them, just like we came up with, whether it's Heather, Highlands, TL, upper, lower, central turf. I do believe that there should be grass at Highlands. That's what I voted for. Well, I didn't second Councilwoman Tingle Doherty's motion. I probably should have, just to have the discussion in hindsight, but I still would have voted against that to have synthetic turf. I felt that Highlands should have grass. However, and again, as Tom said, or excuse me, as Council Member David said, it can't just be, in my opinion, just numbers. And believe me, I know a little bit about numbers, but if you just look at just that and not the quality of life issues, I think we're going to have difficulty, and I know it's the public funds, and don't get me wrong that I want to waste money on anything, but I feel we have to be judicious in using our funds and yet also make sure that we step back and look at the quality of life. I felt it's listed perhaps as an alternate that by getting a lot of participation by putting turf at Heather, but yet not putting it at Highlands, would somewhat try to split the baby. It would cost some money, but I felt that it would be the best alternative. It didn't come out that way. I'm torn tonight because it's, you know, whether it's my choice of what I get to do or whether we should have the decision made on May 8th stand the way it is. And if the way I'm listening to the council tonight, the weight of it may come over here. And I'm not sure about that at the moment, but I'm going to have to decide one way or the other. And I haven't quite figured out where I'm going on that one yet, but I'd like to hear from the mayor and also from Councilwoman Doherty, perhaps if some additional things about some of the thoughts that she would have. But anyway, that's my thoughts, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Grisilli. What I'm hearing actually is, even if I listen, listening to Councilmember Doherty's comments about timing analysis, funding analysis, where the Measure G funds can and can't be used, participation numbers, and where we might get the most return on our dollars spent, and saying that last part, I think that's primarily what Brad is looking at with these numbers. I think all those issues can be looked at standing on the decision we already made. And as I understood it, that's exactly where staff was going to go. Staff, if I remember correctly, what we asked them to do then after we set our decision was look at the decision we've made, do some analysis, come back to us, give some ideas of what we might think of as in terms of priorities, which projects to do first, and so forth. And so I can see all these things being done and still standing on the decision that we made. When we get that information, that is not to say that we couldn't then decide, my gosh, we're spending, this whole thing is going to cost, maybe Brad's numbers are right, I don't know, the $6.7 million, and it's going to give us these many play spots. I would not prohibit staff from looking at what Brad has started here and including that in a report to us when this is all brought back to us. But if that is done, and if that was fine by the rest of the council to take something in draft form that Brad has spent some time on and include it in the staff report, I would be fine with that. I wouldn't want to prohibit that. That said, I don't think we need to revisit this on our next council meeting of June 12th. I think we can allow staff to do what we had asked them to do before, taking into consideration some of these things that have been stated from the dais at this time. So that's where I would be happy to go. I would also like to just add, and I'll hand things back over to Councilmember Doherty so she can might have some other thoughts here. I just want to comment quickly about some of the criticism we did receive about, well, you didn't listen to your advisory committee that you put together, and you didn't listen to these people that work so hard. We did. And we really appreciate the work that they did, because they did work that we couldn't do in terms of analysis and digging into the numbers. We asked folks to look at field use, and that's exactly what they did. And we asked them to, as part of looking at field use and as part of coming up with a solution for field use problems, consider properties. Look around town, see what surplus property we have that we might consider selling, and they did. And they brought that to us, and they said, here's the properties we found, here's maybe the value, you can consider selling these or not consider selling these. Again, homework that if we had spent time doing all that, we wouldn't have been able to do a number of other things that we have our meetings on from month to month. So these folks did invaluable work for this council and gave a position, a recommendation. And we did read it, all those, tons of paper. I got something about this high that, I had to read through to try and understand this issue. And I appreciate that homework, and I know everyone up here appreciates the homework that was done. Now, what those folks were charged with was doing an analysis. We received criticism for making a political decision. Well, you're darn right. We made a political decision. That's our charge. We are politicians, and a political decision, in my mind, is not a bad thing. What that means is we get a little bit away from the analysis and then look at the community as a whole. And what are the concerns of the community? That's when you get into neighborhood concerns. Did we ask the Fields Committee to look at neighborhood concerns? No. We asked them to analyze field use. That's our job, to take the heat for looking at neighborhood concerns. That's a political decision. I will grant you that. It's not an ugly thing. It's the right thing to do. So I'll stop there with my comments.
Matt, I actually agree with you 100%. I think we're perhaps, if I could throw this out to my councilman, what I heard you say is that if staff went through and they did the analysis and given Brad's scenario, basically do the analysis on just the first, what we've asked them to do, which is new grass at Heather, new grass at Highlands, synthetic turf at Terralinda Upper and Lower, and synthetic turf at Central. They're going to do the analysis on that option. They are not going to do the analysis on alternatives 1, 2, or 3 that Brad has put down. Nor would I expect them to, because what my greatest fear is that we get to 2 months from now, whenever staff is finished doing this analysis, and we don't like what it has to say, and all the people who are out here thinking this is a done deal, that the fight is over, we've done them a disservice, because all of a sudden we're going to have to do something, or we should do something. And what I was proposing to do is, rather than make them wait those 2 months and have them think that this is a closed issue, that nothing is going to change, leave it as let's consider, let's get out on the table the alternatives from more of a holistic approach, which is what are the different alternatives, rather than do we want to have it at one field or not at another field. I heard a lot of my fellow council members say, you know what, I think we're all in agreement on a lot, or on the majority of the things that we did at the May 8th meeting. I think the whole issue, in my mind, comes down to location. And I don't know that I feel like we've got enough information. And again, I've asked for, I'd like to see a timing analysis, a funding analysis, and a possible increase in field use for the alternatives, and not just for the direction that we gave to staff in terms of what was decided at the May 8th meeting. And that was my purpose for putting it on as a reconsideration, because I do think that, in all fairness to all of the neighbors that have spent 3 years, 4 years, all of us have spent a lot of time on this, that I would be dismayed if we sold ourselves short by, in my mind, and of course I'm the one that's bringing this up, I feel like I would have voted differently if I'd had some additional information. And I don't want to have the sense that we've done something and that, come 2 or 3 years from now, we're still sitting sort of churning around this issue.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to, let me clarify a couple of things by going to staff, and then I'll get to you, Brad, Councilmember Lewis. First, I'd like to hear from the city attorney on what we did do, because I think it is it can be a little bit of a thorny legal issue, which you advised us of before the meeting. So if you could tell us what it was we did, I would appreciate it, best you can. And then following that, hold on, Mr. Lanzone, if you would, because I want our city manager to be thinking about something while you're speaking. I would like to hear from the city manager what staff was prepared to do. Were they preparing to look at some of these things of timing analysis, funding analysis, where Measure G funds could be spent, participation numbers, so forth, given the decision that we had already made, or given the decision that we made on May 8th? Mr. City Attorney, thank you.
Well, I think you summarized it at the beginning of the discussion. went through the checklist of action taken by the council. What I've advised at this point is if you're going to revisit any of those decisions made, that your consideration at a future meeting would be to agendize a motion to rescind a certain action. Now, take, for example, the decision on turf on Heather. I mean, there actually was a motion, it was seconded, there was a vote, and it didn't pass. It was in effect, there was no final action on that. I'll analogize it to when you have a permit before you, and you have a vote, and a vote has to be made one way or the other so that it's clear of the direction. Take, for example, the non-action on Highlands. It was a motion, and there was just no second, so there was no action on that. But I think everybody walked out of the meeting feeling that there had been some form of action on it, even though by a consensus it didn't go forward, and the same thing with Highlands, there was an actual vote. So I think in the future, for the future agenda, which is this discussion as to what to put on a future agenda, if anything, if you were going to revisit these issues, then I think the agendized issue would be to rescind your action taken at May 8th and consider some other action.
Okay.
Again, just
Thank
for
you.
clarification, I mean, I think in my mind, if you look at actually even the agenda and the staff recommendation, it was to consider each one of these issues and provide direction to staff. And so in terms of the action that we took, we've provided direction to staff to work with the schools to look at Terra Linda, for example, for synthetic turf. However, we haven't taken the motion to put in synthetic turf and to allocate those funds to spend money to put synthetic turf at Terra Linda, for example.
That's
so
correct.
Staff may come back to us and go, we can't put it at upper because the school has plans to put buildings up there. We can't put it at lower, or we don't recommend that we put it at lower because of X, Y, Z, or whatever it may be, in which case it's just come right back at us and we haven't done anything.
Or at that future meeting, staff may come back and say, whatever you've given us direction to consider is going to just cost too much, and here's the figures on participation. And at that point in time, you may decide, well, maybe we have to look at some of the things we decided before and go in a different direction.
Mr. City Manager, Mark Weiss.
What we've begun to do is to prepare budget funding sheets that would itemize the anticipated expenses to implement some of the direction given to us at the last meeting. So our thought is, as part of our capital improvement program, to some degree within our operating budget, that there are some expenses in studying, analyzing, and bringing forward the various components of the direction given to us. If I recall, priorities given to us included the rehabilitation of Highlands from a sand-based to a soil-based field. So we would do an analysis at the staff level in terms of what we think the cost of that might be. If it's something that is beyond our capacity with existing staff, we might put together a program change and request funding for technical assistance in the next year's budget in order to analyze that particular direction and see what the cost would be. And I think we'd be remiss if, when we did that analysis of the cost, if we didn't look at the benefit, if we didn't look at the additional play that we would get. And some of that analysis has already been done. I think at that point you're going to be faced with decisions on that particular matter with whether or not the cost to convert to soil-based is really the right decision, because we expect that to be a rather expensive alternative, and we really may not be able to show you a dramatic increase in play associated with a large expenditure. At the same time, I mean, you may want to rehabilitate the field as a sand-based And so that may be something that we'll look at. But that's just one component. A second component then would be the analysis with respect to Terra Linda. Now, it's our understanding that that was a high priority for analysis as an artificial surface. And so we would do the same kind of a thing there. As we would take a look at the staff level, do we have the expertise on hand to provide that kind of an analysis specific to that direction, or would we require some technical assistance and perhaps only propose to you a feasibility analysis for that field during the next year? And all of this is being done, I should say, with keeping in mind that we do have limited funds. Measure G funds are not available for us to expend for another year, and so there may be some time to do some analyses of the alternatives available to us while we prepare to expend the monies that will be available to us from Measure G a year from now. If there was one thing that you wanted to change direction on, I'm hearing some commentary with regards to Heather, for example. And if the thought is that maybe we should be looking at doing that as an artificial surface as opposed to doing it as a rehabilitation of the existing grass, that would maybe be helpful, because then we would change our direction a little bit and propose the analysis be done for that as an artificial surface as opposed to rehabilitation with grass. And we would then look at whether or not that would increase play, such as I think has been suggested by Councilmember Lewis. So, and that'll give you some idea of what we're doing. I mean, I think the discussion here is right on target with respect to the fact, yeah, we've been given some direction, but all of the things that we're talking about require a lot more activity and analysis, designing, engineering, planning before it actually becomes implemented. And so I don't think anyone should walk away from the last meeting thinking that the direction that's been given to us are decisions that have been cast in concrete. I mean, each and every one of those will come back to you, probably many times over, with a request for funding to do further planning and analysis, and ultimately to bid contracts and award contracts. But if there is any particular element here that you'd like to shift a little bit, and maybe the one that I'm hearing the most interest in is Heather, then I don't know that there would be a problem with you saying, well, let's put that particular decision on a future agenda and just talk about Heather as to whether or not we want to revisit whether or not maybe an artificial alternative should be analyzed there as a high priority in conjunction with Terra Linda.
Okay, Brad, you had some comments?
Well, I guess part of what I'm hearing, I've been heard on the part of the public as well as council speaking about working from the context of a master plan. And part of the context of the master plan is clarifying what those criteria are. Again, my analysis was just take one aspect of it. It's not there's no suggestions in this at all, just an analysis. And I just wanted it to be taken as such. So I would like to see us take those first steps toward the master plan, if this is what the next process of analysis is. And again, for one of the things that I would also like to see is consider to bring into that analysis. I think Heather would be something that I'd still like us to consider as one of those actions from that night, not opening up all the different items for that night necessarily. So that's sort of where I'm coming from it. But again, I'd encourage us to get to that master plan point as soon as possible, so we don't set false expectations, we set sort of realistic expectations. And I've grave concerns about the amount of money of our conversion, the many convert actions to ask staff to look into, and I don't think we've got much of a hope of funding that. I just want to make it as realistic as possible and affect the problem of participation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Lewis. I think we're at a point where we need to consider any motions we might want to take on this, if any.
Perhaps I'll make a motion that I would like to, speaking to our city manager's point, I would like to have this council reconsider our decision not to do any action at Heather as a staff alternative to consider in the overall mix, because as it looks right now, it's a reseeding. Last direction was reseeding Heather, which at a cost of $800,000 with no increase in either participation or levels of ages that can participate at that field. I would like to really understand for $500,000 more, being able to add an additional 1,172 slots that would cover not just up to under 10, but all ages, and expanding current use might be a good use of staff time just as part of this analysis for when they bring this information back to us.
So I want to clarify what you just stated, if I may, which is, if I heard you correctly, you would not be taking, and I'm going to try and reflect back to Tom made the motion on this, I believe, on Heather, and I believe it was to reconstruct that field as a grass field. Tom, do you want to speak to that quickly?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so that's correct. His motion was to reconstruct Heather Field as a grass field, and if I'm hearing you correctly, Inga, it's not to take that off the list here, but to add to the list, if you will, also looking at Heather as a synthetic field when staff does their analysis and brings all of this back to us. Is that correct?
Yeah, I assume so, but I don't know if that means rescinding the failed motion of.
Well,
and again,
you can't rescind it failed. There's nothing
Okay.
to rescind on that.
All right.
Tom's motion would be the one that's being modified.
To add consideration of modification of Tom's motion.
Right.
To consider an all-weather turf at Heather.
Okay, so
that's item 8. If you number these down in our staff report, that's item 8.
I'm sorry, where are you, Tom?
On the staff report, where we read that actions taken were detailed below.
What page?
On the staff report 9A.
Under background?
Yeah.
They aren't numbered, they're
Oh,
just
they aren't
bulleted.
numbered, I
They aren't
see.
numbered,
Yeah.
no, but
Thank you.
if you would number them, this would be number 8. So I know we haven't got a second on this yet, but it may be appropriate to see if anyone else wants to discuss any of these others and get it into the motion.
Actually, I would take all the way from converting the Highlands Park Lower Field athletic field from natural grass sand-based to a soil-based, all the way down through to converting Central Middle School athletic to synthetic turf. I would like to consider just as part of it, really, do we think, and actually having staff be able to come back with maybe a better sense from the folks on the school board around the plans for Terra Linda, so that we can know realistically if indeed, for example, I've heard rumors that the upper athletic field is going to be, is master planned to have some school buildings put up there.
If I may clarify, that, I believe, if I'm hearing Mark correctly, that is exactly what staff intends to do, is take our actions from the May 8th meeting, which included a direction to put in a artificial turf field at both upper and lower Tierra Linda, and to then, one of the first things that they would need to do is contact the school district and find out what they think about those plans, and are they on board with us or not, and so forth. So I think all of those things are part of what staff is intending to do. Without us, we wouldn't have to change our action from the May 8th meeting for that to be done.
Okay, that's fair.
That's true. We will do the analysis with each of the actions that you've given us for direction and try to follow through and provide you with, and I think you've given us some good feedback tonight in terms of the types of analysis that you'd like to see, in terms of the level of play that each of these decisions will allow us to affect in the aggregate. And the cost-benefit analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we intend to do that. We'll certainly pursue the direction that we were given at the
May 8th.
At May 8th meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to tweak that in any way or broaden the scope of that specific to Heather or any of the other options, now would be the time. I guess we'd have to put it on the agenda.
And the only thing I'm hearing from Councilmember Doherty is a motion that we not rescind Tom's action on Heather, but that we amend his motion, if you will, to also include an analysis of Heather as an artificial turf field.
That's what I'm hearing, that we would broaden the analysis and look at it as a priority or as a higher priority for consideration as an artificial surface at Heather.
Right, because right as it stands now, it is not a consideration at all to do artificial turf at Heather.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so what we have is a motion by Councilmember Inga Teagle Doherty to amend Vice Mayor Tom David's motion from the May 8th meeting to.
Well, I would suggest it's not my motion, it's a council decision.
I know, but that's right. That's where we would be going, would be putting that on the agenda for discussion. But the thing on the agenda for discussion would be a motion by Councilmember Doherty to amend Vice Mayor David's motion on the Heather School field to include a consideration, an analysis of artificial turf at the Heather field. We don't need to take a vote on it. We really don't even need a second on it necessarily, I don't suppose. But what we need is, given her motion, do we want to take that motion and agendize it for a future meeting for June 12th?
That's the decision to be made tonight.
Okay, and I heard a second from,
Well, you heard a second on your motion, but you've given us a motion to consider at a future meeting.
agreed.
Agreed. Now, what we need is,
There was a second of that motion to consider at a future meeting, is what I understood Brad's second to be.
okay, is that correct, Councilmember Lewis? Okay.
May I ask for clarification then? We talked a bit about starting with Highlands and also considering Terra Linda and Central. Is that part of this motion, or are we just limiting this motion to Heather?
So what I'm hearing you ask is, are we going to, at that same meeting, look at trying to prioritize, perhaps?
No.
Or just-
Our staff report says convert Highlands to natural grass, convert Terra Linda to synthetic, convert Central to synthetic. And I presume that in absence of a decision otherwise, these decisions will stand.
That's correct.
And we'll simply re-review the Heather decision.
That's correct.
Right?
That's my understanding. And it may be that staff comes back and says, one of those is not
Oh, yeah, we understand that.
feasible, but we'll make that determination at that
But
time.
At this point, it's our determination that we will proceed with the prior decisions. Okay?
So there is a motion, there is a second, and any further discussion on it? Okay, and hearing none, then we can have a roll call. Again, I'll restate the what it is we're doing so everyone understands. What we're doing is considering for the June 12th meeting to put on the agenda a consideration of a motion by Councilmember Doherty to amend Vice Mayor David's motion on the Heather School field to add for analysis by city staff an artificial turf field at that location, not taking away the rebuilding option of that field as a natural grass field. And we've had a second by Councilmember Lewis on that motion.
Councilmember Doherty?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
No.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
No. Does the council wish to have a break, or do we keep charging forward?
So let's keep going.
A little bit longer.
Okay, we'll keep going.
No place to go.
Find my agenda. Okay, our next item for consideration is 9B, which is a resolution authorizing contract with Neil Martin and Associates.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council.
We can't
Item
hear you,
9
Mark. I'm sorry.
Item 9B is the consideration of a resolution authorizing a professional services agreement with Neil Martins and Associates for planning services. At the February meeting, the City Council gave authorization to staff to negotiate a revised agreement with Neil Martins and Associates for planning services. We've conducted those negotiations with Neil Martin and Associates, and the agreement that is before you in the packet is the results of those negotiations. We've itemized within the staff report the fiscal implications. In general, the contract is set up with a retainer for basic planning services. There are provisions within the agreement that outlines a schedule of fees for services that might be required above the basic retainer services that are outlined within the agreement. We have added a number of different clauses within the contract that put some restrictions and bring some consistency to this agreement relative to other contracts that are being proposed. We are including within this packet provisions whereby the effective date for the contract would be July 1st, 2006, but there is a termination provision whereby the contract can be terminated by either party with a 30 days notice. We are suggesting that office space be provided to Neil Martin and Associates for work that they are doing exclusively for the City of San Carlos. We've identified the scope of services within the exhibits. We've outlined the compensation. We've provided for a 4% increase in rates in the retainer effective January 1st, 2008, 4% in 2008. We've proposed a limitation on the hours provided within the retainer amount for meetings beyond business hours, 16 hours per month, and work then above and beyond that would be subject to additional compensation at the rate outlined within the rate schedule. We've asked that the consultant provide us with documentation on the hours that are worked, and then we put a cap on the overall value of this contract in any given fiscal year of $600,000. And I should note that that cap, albeit while the retainer amount has increased, the breadth of the services that are being provided under the retainer have been increased significantly, and the actual total amount of value for this contract has been limited. It's limited both by what value is in the budget, but now it is also limited by the language contained within this contract. And I should indicate to you that in prior years, the expenses for the contract with Neil Martin and Associates has exceeded the amount that is currently within this contract, and therefore you're looking at a reduction in the neighborhood of $100,000 to $150,000, which is consistent with the kinds of reductions that we're looking to accomplish within the city in order to balance the budget. With that, it is our recommendation that the City Council approve the resolution authorizing the city manager to execute this contract.
Thank you, Mark. Council, do we have any questions for staff?
Hello. I had a question, Mr. Weiss. You said the contract is limited to $600,000. What was it in previous years? Do you know?
There actually was not a limit within the contract itself. There were provisions within the contract for a retainer and then an hourly for work done and above and beyond the work that was included within the retainer. All applications, formal applications, were above and beyond the retainer. And so the actual expenditures did not have a cap. It was restricted by a budget amount. The actual expenses, if you go back and look at the previous years, has ranged between $700,000 and $750,000 for the last 3 years or so.
Sort of a follow-up to that, then if we see that it would be going over $600,000, you'd have to come back to the council for additional funding?
That is correct.
And you don't anticipate, or do you anticipate, since you just said it's $750 and $770 or whatever it was, are you anticipating then you will come back? Is this sort of possibly an artificially low number?
It's possibly artificially low if we end up with an awful lot of applications that require the day-to-day work to exceed that amount that we're anticipating within the retainer. We've itemized within the document the assumptions that we're making that make up the retainer amount. We'll monitor that work as it occurs based upon the application that activity that we have. But in working with Neil Martin and Associates, I think that this is a reasonable value, and part of the budgetary process, which we haven't gotten into in a lot of detail yet, is we've asked each department to look at 5, 10, and 15% reductions, and we've asked the planning department Neil Martin and Associates to also look at those kinds of reductions in submitting a proposal to us for the upcoming year. So this reflects what we will be proposing to you. It's consistent with what we will be proposing to you for budgetary consideration in the very near future. We believe it's a reasonable amount of money, but what it does assure you is that if there is a need to exceed this, that we would come back to you, document the reasons for that, and ask for your approval.
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions through the chair, if I may. Just for clarification, most of the, or do you know what percentage of the professional services that are provided by Neil Martin and Associates are actually reimbursed through the different projects that they're working on? Is any of the 39301 proposed actually reimbursable charges? For example, if they spend time on Palo Alto Medical Foundation, or let me choose not that because that's a different example.
Yeah.
If they spend time on, for example, an application that comes to the planning department, the fees for their time are recouped through the planning fees. Is that correct?
For a formal application, yes. But I don't have the
It's a
percentage.
formal application, and so you don't know what percentage.
I don't have the percentage that would be anticipated within this contract with me this evening. We will have estimates when we bring the budget forward for the revenue that we expect from planning applications as part of the assumptions that go into making up the revenue stream within the budget.
So in all fairness, at this point, we should, as a council, consider this $39,301 as overhead, the cost of a planning department within a city that might be performing services related to ordinance amendments or specific plans, that type of citywide planning that isn't directly reimbursable to or from an applicant.
I do believe that there is sufficient work or sufficient money and time within that retainer amount to do a good deal of the routine applications that we receive. I am not going to stand here, though, and guarantee that if we end up with Pamp Winding Way and Devonshire Canyon, and you throw 3 or 4 huge projects at us, one of two things will have to happen. I mean, under that scenario, we would either have to bring this contract back to you for an amendment in consideration of the number of large applications that we received, all of which are being paid for by the applicant, or we would contract with other planning firms to handle that kind of activity. One thing that I didn't mention here, but is referenced in the staff report, you'll see that the retainer is actually proposed to come down in about 6 months. And the reason for that is we're making an assumption that we're going to hire a community development director that will provide some of the planning, supervision, and guidance. The community development director we hope to have on board will be a planner by trade. And so some of the work that the planning manager is currently providing within the scope of the retainer would be provided by the community development director.
So for clarification, a retainer is an amount that is guaranteed, and I noticed the breakdown of hours and the rates per hour, which I'm assuming are somewhat estimates,
yes,
which make up the basis for that retainer amount.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, we will be invoiced and we will pay out the retainer amount for not specifically just those hours that are limited. So we're not going to be limited, for example, to I don't know what, I can't add them all up here in my head, but
well,
3,000 hours.
But you're right. I mean, we will be paying them a monthly amount of $39,000 plus as a retainer, and we will be monitoring the hours to see whether or not we got the estimate dramatically wrong. I'm fully expecting that we'll get that amount of hours and that the pressure will be on to either compensate above and beyond the retainer or reduce the hours.
So it's not a ceiling retainer. It's basically this is the amount estimated to be, and we use up those hours, but it may be higher because it's billed on actual hours and rates of the individuals who are performing those functions.
The retainer is intended to be for a specific amount of planning services, which should be sufficient, we believe, to carry on and accommodate the day-to-day activities of the planning department. Now, we do have some additional monies that will be put in the budget for projects above and beyond that, such as the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, such as some housing programs that we're transferring from the economic development director to the planning department. And so there may be provisions for us to spend some of the monies that will be outlined within the budget for those kinds of activities above the retainer amount. But the retainer is designed to accommodate and pay for basic planning services, including formal applications that we can reasonably expect. But if there's a wild variation or a shift, we're asking for documentation so that we can see the hours that are being spent, we can monitor it, and make changes as might be deemed appropriate.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you very much.
Right?
So now I have a clarification just so I understand this. I thought I did. I'm not sure I still do. So this is your best estimate on a monthly retainer?
Yes.
But that may fluctuate based on hours worked?
The retainer won't, but there may be some additional billings above and beyond the retainer for projects that get our approval.
That are outside the scope of the retainer?
Correct.
Yes. Thank you.
But we've put a cap on it to make sure that if we ever go beyond that amount, and like I say, that cap is significantly lower than what we've spent in the past on these services.
Thank you. And I just want to say that I'm really happy to see like some of the active planning going on to try to do better on the budget and the structural deficit that we've got. So thanks for doing that hard work, and thanks to Director Cullinan for hopefully participating in that process as well.
Mayor Davids?
No, I'm ready to go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I know, and I have some questions too. So, Cheryl, you'll pass? Okay. I have a number of questions. One is when I read through the contract, especially when I read through the attachment portion of it that details some of the things, get past the boilerplate, if you will. I have a number of concerns because I compare that to the 20-factor test that I had mentioned to you, Mark, when we talked on the phone. And I look at the 20-factor test.
Through the chair, I apologize. What is a 20-factor test?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, okay. A 20-factor test is what the IRS uses to determine whether or not you're an employee or a contractor.
Thank you. Got it.
Yeah. Okay. And when you go through this and you go through the Exhibit A, there's a lot of places where I bump into the 20-factor test. Number one is seeming to give instruction about, when to be here and when to be on the premises and what to do. That's giving instruction. Offering training and to pay for training is, if you do that, you look like an employee. Services rendered. Personally, there's something in here that talks about the city manager being able to determine on page 4, item 7, under Exhibit A, individuals assigned to the principal planner and planner 3 positions shall be subject to approval by the city manager. Set hours of work, again, saying that these folks will work during established counter hours to man phones and so forth. Work done on the premises, payments being paid by the hour, and that addresses the 16 hours figured in, but if it goes over that, then we pay by the hour extra for that, which also relates to something on here about profit or loss, that if you're an independent contractor, then you just take the risk of profit or loss. You agree to do a job for a price, and if you didn't estimate that correctly, then you lose. If you estimated correctly, maybe over correctly, then you win. But you set yourself up for profit or loss when you're a contractor. You don't when you're an employee. So there's a number of items in here in this Exhibit A that deeply have me concerned, because I think we're running into this 20-factor test, and if you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Actually, I would defer to the city attorney on questions relative to the 20-factor test.
I don't have a similar concern. The 20-factor test is an IRS test. California courts have other tests. The whole idea is the person an employee, so that if they got hurt, they could sue you for workers' comp, or they could come back for back wages, so that they can get unemployment if they were discharged. Is there a downside on those issues? One significant difference And I think we have to keep that in mind with both this contract and the Mactari contract is we have these contracts with corporations. We're not contracting with an individual, and that's one of the things in the 20-factor test that's considered too. Who is the contract with? Is this personal? And in each case, we have corporations that do work other places for other private and public entities, and I think that's very, very significant. And the 20-factor test doesn't mean you have to hit all the 20 factors. It's a qualitative judgment, if you will, that's almost on a case-by-case basis. And you have a number of factors here, in addition to the fact that we're contracting with corporations that do work elsewhere, that are significant, such as the right to discharge, which you have here on a 30-day notice, which would be different from an employee. Whether their services are available to the public at large, which they are for each of these firms. They have the right to leave, just as we have the right to discharge. It's not full-time. They have work that they do outside of the work they do for the city. The training is a limited training, almost like the training the city attorney can get if I go to the League of Cities City Attorney Conference. The city has been reimbursing that or their share of it with other cities when I've worked with other cities for 20 years. So if you go through these one by one, Matt, I will agree with you that there are some that don't seem to be on all fours with the 20-factor test. But again, it's not a hard, fast rule. You don't look at all 20. You have to look at the overall picture. And I don't have any problem at all legally, from a legal standpoint, in saying that they are independent contractors with respect to the jobs they're doing with the city.
Okay, thank you. You hit on something, Bob, that is one of my other questions, and that is when I look at the indemnity clause that's in the contract, and I had a couple of situations that I wanted to run through quickly, if we could, to understand what would happen, and that is, the first one is what happens if an NMA employee, Neil Martin and Associates employee, is involved in a sexual harassment suit as either a perpetrator or a victim via city employee or victim via city client. We did come close to that one time, I think, recently. And how does the indemnity clause address that?
Indemnity would cover that. That would be an intentional misconduct. So gross negligence and intentional misconduct are things that we are indemnified for by NMA or Mactari. Where this is different from
So that's if what you're saying there, Mr. City Attorney, is if the NMA employee was the perpetrator.
Right.
Right, okay. So we're covered there. If they're the victim, say a city employee victimizes an NMA employee in a sexual harassment situation, just for example.
Well, we have an obligation as not only an employer but as a city to provide a safe place for people who come to City Hall as opposed to those who work in City Hall. So, I mean, there are legal obligations we have. I think we'd have a legal obligation if we had an employee that we did not properly supervise who perpetrated such an act, we might have legal liability not only to NMA but anybody.
Would it be...
So we can't avoid that liability in this contract.
Correct, but I think the nub of the issue is, would it be any different with for the city in terms of cost and potential litigation and so forth, if it were an employee to an employee versus an employee to an NMA employee?
Well, in our experience, there wouldn't be any difference. It might be more expensive, employee to employee.
Okay, all right. And then also associated to this indemnity clause is what happens if an NMA employee provides information to a city client, as it were, that is incorrect and causes harm to a city client, and then that client turns around and sues us?
Well, the city has immunity, and we've extended kind of a quasi-immunity, if you will, coverage to NMA that goes back in all the years that Neil Martin had the contract, and I think it's also been in the past Mactari contract, so that If they're acting in the course and scope of their services for the city, then we stand behind that work the way we would as if they were an employee, if you will. Take, for example, when we had a lawsuit from Virgil Stevens, and he sued everyone, including myself, I think, as city manager. He sued the planner. He sued Jack. So the city provided a defense and an indemnity for all of the city staff, if you will, regardless of whether they are employees or contractors. And that's what that indemnity provision provides.
Okay. Thank you. The other questions I had have to do with, you have a clause in here about, and this is back to the city manager, extra work that might come up. And I had thought that we had talked about this and were looking for this not to be an issue either for the council or for the contractor, that we would just simply take that away as an option altogether. But I see it back in here. Could you just address that?
Well, special projects or studies on page 6, it reads that the consultant is prohibited from bidding on or being compensated for special projects or studies outside of this contract without authorization by City Council. Special studies include but are not limited to preparation of environmental impact reports, general or specific plans. And so we're saying that they're prohibited from bidding on other projects that might be large or small in scope that we do RFPs and the like on, unless you approve it. I mean, if for some reason the council wants to grant the opportunity for Neil Martin and Associates to perform additional work, we thought that that would be at your discretion. So we simply put a clause in here that would allow for you to make that decision.
Can you take us through an example of where or why we might want to do that as opposed to just keeping it clean and separated?
It just provides for an opportunity for you to make that determination at a later date. I mean, this is a contract that can't anticipate any and every possible scenario. We've tried to put a cap on it. We've tried to indicate what the stipulations are and what's included within the retainer. We've put as many restrictions, I think, we certainly have enhanced a number of restrictions within this contract vis-a-vis what's been there previously, and yet it is a living document to some degree. I mean, they provide a broad base of planning service. And
I'll give an example. The East Side Specific Plan, if it ever comes back, NMA has done a lot of work on that in the past. You might, and it probably wouldn't be within the scope of the general planning services, or it might not be, so it'd be over and above. And you might consider the fact that it might cost less to have them do a revised East Side Specific Plan than hire an outside consulting firm who would have to come all the way up to speed on everything that has happened in the past with the East Side Specific Plan. Just an example.
And that's not one that I'd actually thought of as being something, it's not something I'm contemplating. I'm just giving an option in here for the City Council to go down that path if you choose.
Through the Chair, if I may just ask a follow-up question to that. I know in the past we have, as a council, have given discretion, a certain amount of discretion to the city manager to make what I would consider more administrative types of decisions, up to a certain dollar amount, for example, where it would not have to come back to City Council. And I'd be interested in your perspective on this, if indeed you would see cases where perhaps for special projects up to a certain amount, if you would like to be able to have that discretion without having to bring it back to the full council just because it fell outside of the scope of this contract.
The city manager's limitation is currently $50,000, I believe, and so that would be something that would need to come back at that level.
And I guess I'm looking at my fellow council members as well. I mean, do we really want to have every single possible special project be written into, these contracts don't come before us that often. And do we want to consider amending this contract potentially to allow some discretion to the city manager? Obviously, it's got to be budgeted and the funding's got to get approved through the council, but allowing the city manager to be able to have that discretion to, for example, work with Neil Martin and Associates to get that done rather than waiting for a council meeting for us to approve it and then getting it agendized.
Keep that thought when we come back and discuss
Okay, so
motions
I'll
on
just
this.
put that out there. Thank you for that.
I wanted to ask about the 4% increase that's forecast in here for January 1, 2008, because when we visited this before and even discussed going to contract which is why we have this before us now, the goal at some point in the future is to, and you had talked about this, Mr. Weiss, working towards a fully staffed, employee-based city hall, as opposed to using contracts for consultants other than special projects and so forth, as at least that's what I think of contractors or consultants are for, really, is to do special projects that come up that are beyond the scope of the staff that you have here. So I'm a little curious about having something in here about a 4% increase when down the road we're looking at
I think
changing over.
I think two things. I mean, first of all, my understanding was, it was not that the entire organization was going to be converted by this decision or within this contract. Was not going to be converted to an employee-based organization throughout. We certainly are moving towards a community development director that is a planning professional who would be a city employee, and to that degree there would be an employee-based organization to provide a professional planner that would give guidance to this contract. But it was not my understanding that the direction of this council was to convert the planning function from a contract basis to an entire employee-based organization. That's not the premise upon which I embarked upon these negotiations.
Okay. And one of the other things we discussed was at some point taking these contracts, which have never been put out to an RFP or not in quite some, it's been quite a long while since this contract has been to an RFP process. So again, why would we consider a 4% increase for January 1, 2008 when even this time we're not putting this out to an RFP, we're not looking at it relative to what it might, what kind of expenses we might have with employees versus using contracts?
I think two things. One is that it's a negotiation. City manager sat down with the director of Neil Martin and Associates, and we discussed this and negotiated an agreement that would suggest that there probably will be some cost of living adjustments warranted within the lifetime of this particular agreement. And if it's not revisited and amended prior to January of 2008, a 4% increase in 18 months seems like a reasonable value to this manager in terms of something that might be acceptable to the City Council. Secondarily, I did review some schedules of other firms that had proposed work for the city on other projects, other planning firms, and I will say that the rates before you are certainly competitive, very competitive, with the planning firms that have submitted proposals to us on other projects. And secondarily, within the scope of this particular contract, even the rates that we're getting from Neil Martin and Associates are a reduction from their published rates that they provide for most clients. And so I think that the rates that are being given to us are very competitive. And I think the 4% in 18 months is well within what is a reasonable amount for this council to consider.
Can we then go to Exhibit B, which is on page 5 of the attachment for the rest of the council? It's obviously after Exhibit A. And it gives there a number of different positions and dollar amounts. I took these numbers, by the way, some other numbers to compare from the report we received a while back on what was this called? Oh, here it is. This report that was done by Harvey Rose. And it was a little bit hard to compare, so correct me if I'm misstating these things. The principal planner that's proposed at 120 was at 90. Planner 3, which is proposed at 85, was 74. Planner 2, which is proposed at 70, was at 62. And Planner 1 was that's at 65 was proposed, or was at 55 is proposed for 65, and then administrative assistant at $40 stays the same. Is that correct?
I'll trust that that's correct.
I mean, we have
If you're
nothing.
reading it from the report. I mean, I indicated within here that there were rate adjustments from 0 to 33%, and that seems consistent with what you've
Okay.
just outlined.
Okay. And then I wanted to. Sorry, that's all right.
Brian had the report. I just happened
Oh,
to
the
hit
Harvey-
page,
the Harvey Rose
luckily,
report?
Page 36, and it says in the footnote that
right.
those are not exact. It's not an exact science when they try to compute the hours because it was an estimate.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Fair enough.
And there certainly is an increase in the rates.
Yes.
Being proposed here.
See that. The 16 hours, which is talked about on page 2 of the staff report, and it says limitation on hours, on the provided hours, or hours provided, excuse me, within the retainer for meetings after regular business hours is 16 per month, with additional hours compensated on an hourly basis. Two questions with that. One is if we had an employee in that position that would be considered administration level, professional, they would work those meetings regardless of what their salary was or whatever. They wouldn't get a bonus for going to extra meetings, correct?
But a reasonable city manager might give them some time off if it's being abused.
Okay.
You have to be reasonable with people in order
Sure.
to continue to have them to work with you. I mean, and what we looked at is 16 hours a month would be 4 hours a week, so that would be a 4-hour council meeting, a 4-hour planning commission meeting, a 4-hour council meeting, a 4-hour planning commission meeting. We thought that beyond that, I mean, you know, it's only reasonable to say that if we're going to have meetings every night and expect people to be at the counter every day, that beyond this, I mean, the 16 hours is included within the retainer, but at some point beyond that, we would expect that there would be compensation. So at the 17th hour, we're suggesting that we pay them at the hourly rate of the appropriate employee that has been assigned to the task. And you're correct. If you have a, I'll use myself as an example.
You're a good example.
Been going to fire meetings, been going to council meetings. You know, two night
Working the
meetings,
heck out of you, Mark.
doing lots of social events, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
And you're right. You pay a base salary. And I get administrative leave and I get annual leave, and then we'll sit down and discuss it in September, you know.
Don't even think about it. Okay. Well, digging into that a little bit, do we then, you know, there's like August, we have one meeting. We give ourselves a little vacation time in August. You'll get that too, by the way. You won't have to go to 2 August meetings. You don't have to come here and sit by yourself. And then in December, we don't have a meeting. So there's 2 months out of the year that's pretty guaranteed we only have one meeting.
Right.
And then, you know, there are, quite frankly, we're going through a sort of a different spell here with a lot of meetings that we're having to conduct. But, you know, there are times where we have meetings and the planning director is not required to be here, or any planning staff are needed for the meeting. So are we then keeping a log of the months where we're under and compensating?
We're going to track
it to the months that we're over?
We're going to track it to see whether or not, you know, this is a fair deal. And we can report on that periodically in terms of the hours. You know, we're going to document and follow this to see whether or not. But what it
We're
says,
signing a contract with an agreement. So
Yes,
right now,
and-
the way the agreement is stated is, it seems to be stated that the compensation is already based on 16 hours, and then if we go over, we're going to pay extra. It doesn't say anything about keeping track. If we're, for the months we're under, we'll compensate, or, you know,
We're going to
even
get,
out the waves, the highs and the lows.
but we're going to track it, but it provides up to 16 hours. And we have regular council meetings, we have regular planning commission meetings. We're just saying that beyond those hours, that there would be additional compensation from the professional services account beyond the retainer amount.
Beyond those hours each
I mean,
month?
You know,
or
there's a different way to do this, folks.
Aggregate.
We can do this on an hourly basis. My experience would dictate that the retainer is generally a better system in that you will generally get more hours of service than you will pay for. And that's my experience. It may not prove to be the case here, and if it isn't, we'll monitor, we'll report back, and we'll revisit the contract. The advantage of the retainer is that it provides some assurance of a guaranteed revenue stream to the consultant. The advantage to us is that we know that we've got this consultant on board as a priority, and that they will be here to provide the services within this contract. If we go to a strict hourly basis, you will probably pay a bit more per hour, and you may not be able to control the scope of services as well as you can under this kind of a scenario.
Perhaps
Okay,
just in the
that's-
interest
those
of
are-
time,
those
I
are
could
all my questions.
make
Thank
a
you very
motion.
much.
Unless there's further discussion.
Well, we haven't had any discussion so far, so we've just had questions for staff. I'll open it up for discussion at this point. Or if you want to make a motion, and then a
I
second,
would,
we can discuss your motion.
Move we approve
I'm sorry,
a
Councilmember
resolution
Doherty?
authorizing
Councilmember
contract with
Doherty?
Neil Martin and Associates. Hold on, let me finish my
I
motion.
have a speaker card.
Okay, that's fine. Modifying, well, Cheryl said she didn't want to speak.
You don't, okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
she said that at the very
All right,
beginning,
all
Matt. And in fact, changing or providing a modification to Exhibit B under special projects or studies to allow the consultant, that basically changes the language to say the consultant is prohibited from bidding on or being compensated for special projects or studies outside of this contract if over $50,000 without authorization by the City Council.
For clarification, can you repeat that last part?
Yes, page 6, under the Exhibit B, actually the second page of the Exhibit B, there's a project, there's an area titled Special Projects or Studies, and would propose to that we prohibit the consultant from bidding on or being compensated for special studies outside of this contract if over $50,000 without the authorization by City Council, which I think there may be cases. I applaud our city manager, Mark Weiss, in trying to put the old, a lot of control into this contract, but I do believe that there may be times where he does need to have the discretion as the city manager to be able to work with Neil Martin and to move projects through if they fall within his normal range that he would be able to authorize on anything else.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Hearing none, the motion dies.
I'll move approval of the recommendation.
Okay, Tom is making a motion, Vice Mayor Davids is making a motion to approve the contract with recommendations as they stand. Is there a second?
Second.
Open for discussion? Brad?
I'm sorry, just as a short explanation, I think we've been through an awful lot with these contracts as they double into other contracts, and I think, under normal circumstances, Councilwoman Doherty is correct, but I think we're sort of living in an abnormal world as we get these contracts back in gear, and I would hate to, frankly, I'm not sure the city manager wants the ability to add anything to this contract without talking to the council. I may want to put words in his mouth, but I think that bringing it back to us is sufficient, and I think there's enough in the contract to allow normal things to happen on a scheduled basis without having to, to ding us with a lot of little detail.
Well, I'm sort of betwixt and between here because I'm opposed to these contracts on principle altogether. I would like to offer a motion for an alternative motion, but I'm a little loath to do so because, again, I'm not quite in favor of these at all, but I'll give it a try. So, Tom, I'm going to put a competing motion on the table, and we'll see where it goes.
I mean, what does Roberts tell us about a competing motion?
Competing motion tells us that, well, if it gets a second and then we discuss it, we would vote on that first,
All right.
and then we would come back to your motion depending on what happens with mine. If mine passes, yours goes by the wayside.
Very good. I'm with you.
It's a substitute motion.
Not competing. Okay.
Yeah.
The lingo straight.
Thank you. Okay, so the motion that I would like to suggest is that we approve the contract as stated with the following changes. One, that we eliminate any language referring to a future 4% increase, and that we eliminate any language that talks about or discusses paying for additional hours beyond 16, well, just would eliminate any reference to 16 months of hours to cover meetings or additional hours to cover meetings, that it would just be, those meetings would simply be covered by the retainer.
Well, I guess I would buy the first part based upon the fact we can always come back and give an honorable adjustment over time. The second one, I think you're asking too much, Matt.
Okay, so I'll drop that, and I'll change my motion to be in line with what you're liking, Tom, which is that we would eliminate any language referring to a 4% increase effective January 1, and leaving the language about the 16 hours per month and additional hours compensated.
So for discussion on that, are we open for discussion, Mayor Crocott?
We haven't got a second, but
Oh,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
I might squeeze one out of Tom, Vice Mayor Davids, I
I
think.
think I hear a second over on that end of the table.
Oh.
Did I hear a second over there?
No, you did not.
Okay, I'll second for discussion.
Okay, Tom has seconded. Now it's open for discussion.
So this is just a question for City Manager. You know, what I'm concerned about is these are fairly careful negotiations, and I just wouldn't want to undo negotiations that have been done. So the concern would be, is Neil Martin, is this going to compromise, in your opinion, Mr. Weiss, our ability to get this contract completed?
It might.
Thank you.
Well, Vice Mayor Davids, if I heard you correctly, what you're saying is it doesn't eliminate a review of an increase. It just takes it out of the contract as a given at that time.
Well, yes,
that's my intent as well.
Just like approving an increase in hours, we can approve an increase in pay.
Right.
What is the actual term of this? I thought I had that, and I seem to have lost it. Is there a term on the contract?
Vice Mayor Davis, my impression in reading through the contract is that it's because it's an automatic review after 3 years.
3 years.
That effectively it's 30 days notice by either party, but that there's a formal review at 3 years, so for the way I'm looking at this is there's a built-in 4% at 18 months with an automatic review at 3 years. So from my standpoint, it's fair to ask over the course of...
And what's the early out of someone if Neil Martin, associate, wants out of the deal?
30 days by either party by written notice.
So they come back to us in January of 2007 and say we'd like a 4% increase, and if we don't give it to them, they can take a hike. Or we can all get serious and we can give it to them.
Right, or they can take a hike now if they don't like that term.
Sure.
And I think, it just seems to me we're sending a message that we don't think that that we're nickel and diming them. And I don't think that's, we've had a very positive and long-standing relationship with Neil Martin and Associates. They've done a lot of good work for the city. And, I heard from the city manager as well that, this indeed there's a relationship here. There is a contractual agreement, but, this isn't like bidding out for someone to come and, drop your plans to do your house and, come 6 months from now, you may not have a relationship with them again. This is an ongoing type of relationship. So I think it's fair to allow them to plan their business around a predictable revenue stream without making them come back and ask for an increase and putting it into a contentious discussion.
I would say to that, Councilmember Doherty, that given it is a long-term relationship, it should offer the strength of being able to come forward and say, we think we're worth a little more, and we have the boldness to ask for it. We have a relationship with you. You know us, we know you. I feel comfortable coming forward and asking for an increase, as opposed to just having it fixed in a contract for 18 months out.
Well, I think that's what they've done. I think they've come to us and said they'd like to have an increase, and they just would like to have it be predictable. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with that from a business standpoint.
Yeah, I read it as roughly 1.3% per year over the course of the contract, course of a 3-year contract before formal review, roughly.
Through the term, yeah.
So, I mean, I just...
The 4%, oh, I see. If you stick to the 4% 18 months out and then stick to it until 3 years.
And I'm also concerned with as many things as we have going. We're getting great service, I think, and I think it's reasonable to expect over a 3-year term, a 4% increase, which is all we're committing to at this point. And it's 18 months out, which helps us. So, I don't know, it's just the way I look at it.
Okay.
You want to call the
If there's
question?
not any more discussion, we can take a vote.
Very good. On the substitute motion, Mayor Grocott?
Yes?
Councilmember Davids?
No.
Councilmember Grisilli?
No.
Councilmember Lewis?
No.
Councilmember Teagle Doherty?
No.
Okay, Vice Mayor Davids, the way this works is it comes back to your motion now, which is we just take the recommendation of staff and we'll run with it.
And I would say yes to that. I'm sorry.
Unless there's any further discussion.
I'm out of order here.
Yeah.
Grisilli seconded?
Right.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Councilmember Grisilli?
So any discussion on Tom's
Wait, she's calling the question, Matt.
Vice Mayor's
Oh, sorry.
motion?
Just zooming right ahead.
I know, but I want to, because we discussed so much my motion, now we're back to Vice Mayor David's motion. I want to give opportunity for any discussion, if there is any, on the motion. And hearing none, we will take roll call. So just to be clear, the motion by Vice Mayor Davids is to take staff recommendation on the contract and move forward with the contract based on the recommendations of staff. And Councilmember Grisilli seconded. Roll call.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Teagle Doherty?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
No.
Mr. Mayor, may I have a
Yes.
a question here? I perceive the next one's going to take perhaps even longer than this one. I'm wondering whether we could move over into the item regarding 10A, not 10A, but 10B. I know there are a few people in the audience that are going to be around for that, and they might like to leave earlier than we would otherwise get to them.
Yeah, and I do need to have a hard stop at 10:30 again.
I would accept that consideration, Vice Mayor Davids. So, City Clerk, we are going to go on to item 10A, excuse me, 10B, which is consideration of request for a moratorium on coffee shops within the 600, the 700, and the 800 blocks of Laurel Street between San Carlos Avenue and Arroyo Avenue, including the proposed Starbucks on the 800 block of Laurel Street. As we get into this, I'm just going to ask someone to keep an eye on the clock if we need to make a motion to continue to let us know about that. Okay, so who is going to give us a staff report on this item? I see Liz Cullinan, Planning Director, coming forward.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Grocott, members of the City Council. As you're aware, you've got a request before you. It's in the form of a petition containing approximately 290 signatures at the time of the preparation of our report to you, requesting that there be a limitation on coffee shops within the 600, 700, 800 block of Laurel Street, and also that would be between San Carlos Avenue and Arroyo, and also a prohibition on the Starbucks that's being proposed at 856 Laurel Street. What I thought I'd do is just summarize the recommendations that we presented for your consideration this evening, the alternatives really, and then give you some background on the Citizens Retail Task Force Advisory Committee that was appointed by the Council in 2003. The options that we're presenting to you for consideration are, first, that you direct the Economic Development Advisory Committee, the EDAC Committee, and the Planning Commission to study the issue of limiting coffee shops within the area that we've just mentioned. Secondly, that you consider limitations on coffee shops in a potential West Side specific plan update. That's something that will be before you in terms of budget considerations for the future, and also was presented during the strategic planning process. Third, that you initiate an urgency ordinance, which would establish a moratorium on new coffee shops in the area. And finally, that you provide staff with any alternative direction that you see fit. As I mentioned, in 2003, the Citizens Advisory Committee was appointed by the council to address opportunities and constraints for the economic viability and sustainability of the city's downtown. The conclusion of this committee was that while the downtown had a number of strengths, such as 4 contiguous downtown blocks, quality pedestrian improvements, strong demographics, and convenient parking, there were a number of challenges in order to maintain and sustain its economic viability and vitality. And we presented those key recommendations to you in the staff report that you have this evening. I'll just go through those briefly. First, that the city retain its current retail definition, which would allow some flexibility and some analysis by the planning department on a case-by-case basis for future retail tenants in the downtown area. Secondly, there was an acknowledgement by the committee, as advised by a team of experts, that there was a first wave of success that could happen in a downtown area, and that might include the location of tenants such as Starbucks, Pete's, Blockbuster Video, TCBY Yogurt, et cetera, that might indicate that first wave of success. Third, that there was a need to increase the hours of operation in the downtown area. The report also talks about an experience that shoppers desire in the downtown area. It's a little bit more than retail opportunities, but also opportunities to have coffee, to see movies, to go to quality restaurants, bookstores, that kind of a thing. And finally, that the city should not necessarily prohibit uses that they found not to be desirable, but to instead provide incentives for uses that would be desirable. In terms of the options that we've presented to you this evening, the first one being that you refer the issue to the EDAC and the Planning Commission. That really represents our recommendation in the sense that it's a strategic process. It takes a look at the downtown and its health and viability as a whole, rather than looking at an individual issue. In terms of exploring limitations, another way to do that strategically, of course, is to look at having an update in the West Side specific plan in the future. In terms of initiating an urgency ordinance or moratorium, there is specific state law on that type of process, and that's something that can be done if there is an imminent threat to the public safety, and if the issue at hand is in conflict with either an existing general or specific plan or a general or specific plan that is pending. So with that, we do feel there would be some concerns with initiating an urgency ordinance. In closing on this topic, the specific request in the petition is also to prohibit the Starbucks that has undergone tenant improvements at 856 Laurel Street. And the city attorney and I do have concerns about that, since they have been issued building permits and also received a business registration, as they are in compliance with current codes. So at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know that the leader on the petition also has some additional signatures that he would like to present, and probably has a presentation as well.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cullinan. Why don't we go ahead and take questions for Ms. Cullinan, and then what I would like to do, Council, is give Mr. Siemens the opportunity, since he works so hard on the, and he's the reason we're looking at this, to come up and, without the limit of 2 minutes, public speaker, give us his reasons for creating this and the impetus behind it. But first, I wanted to allow us to ask staff any questions we might have.
So, Liz, the Starbucks new location was one that was done by the book, under the rules. There's no reason to deny them anything. It was a permitted use, and they paid their fees and moved forward.
That's correct.
So, if we're looking at a moratorium of some kind, we'd be looking at a moratorium such as we had with banks at one time. I think we probably still do, or with beauty shops, which would, in a sense, limit them or forbid any more, or whatever our indication may be. And that would then become a part of the zone, or the permitted uses in the zone, and would take effect at that time.
That's correct.
So when we look at the at the petitions. I mean, we're recognizing people have some interest in this. But when we look at what Starbucks is doing, we also recognize that they are doing what they can do and what we've allowed them to do. And therefore, the idea that we should put them on hold and tell them to go away really is not a practical end result, or not legal, or not
I
possible.
would say probably not legally sound as well.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
I just had actually two questions. The first had to do with the new location. Is it an additional location that they're planning to relocate from the corner where they currently are to the middle of the block, or are they planning to keep both locations open?
Keep both locations open.
Okay, and then my second, actually, this is really more, I had a question about the petition. I noticed at the top and in handwritten it says 5606, approximately 1,200 total signatures. Is that, did we just like not get all of the pages, or, because I got 10 pages with 29 per, which is 290 signatures. So was kind of curious where.
That's what I've got as well, and I think
Okay,
this
so
was
you got
submitted,
the
and I think you're
10
probably.
pages, 29 per page, totaling 290. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something.
Excuse me, I have a question. In the staff report, it said that the city has adopted prohibitions on new personal services within the downtown and has required minimum distances between banks. So pursuing Vice Mayor David's point, we could consider minimum distances between chains, or like chain retail, repetitive chain retail or something, if we in a future. Is that correct?
Well, I think venturing into limitations between chains versus limitations on types of uses, more generic types, that would be a new territory that I don't think a lot of cities have gone into, limiting specific chains.
Okay, yeah, that's the sort of information I'm looking for. So it's more like a coffee shop limitation, minimum distances or something like that, as opposed
Exactly.
to calling out a particular company or brand.
Right. That's there's precedence for that in San Carlos and certainly elsewhere.
Thank you.
Ms. Cullinan, again, you may not know the answer. Is this Starbucks owned by the company, or is it franchised by individual?
I believe it's the company.
So the company owns the one on the corner, and the company is going to own the one at 856.
I believe that's correct. Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, I have one. Well, here, yeah, I have one question, and that is, it seems to me part of the thing we're being asked to consider, at least, is a prohibition on coffee shops, as you stated. We've done with banks and hair salons, nail salons, that kind of thing, as far as creating a distance between where they are. And I think banks
correct
corners as well. So if just considering the market, it seems to me if it's the mom and pop family owned business coffee shop, there's sort of a built-in limitation, because before you make that move, you have to consider the expense of rent and employees and all those kinds of things. And for a family-run business or a mom and pop that has only a certain amount of capital and so forth, there's just built-in limitations on that. I don't think you're going to see them popping up all over the place, and we haven't. Or have we? Am I wrong on that? As far as the family-owned.
There tend to be trends, I think, in terms of the types of uses that come along. Sometimes we'll get waves of personal service uses, other times coffee shops, and sometimes just small retail food shops, little pizza shops, that kind of a thing. So we tend to get them in waves.
Okay. And then when I look at the issue, part of the thing that I see here is the large national retail or regional retail. Starbucks being national, I think Pete's is more what we would consider regional. But there's more money behind a venture like that, and they can afford to pay more in rent. They can take a greater risk. So my question is there the possibility, and perhaps you might want to defer to Mr. Lanzone on this, is there the possibility of having something that would prohibit the number or having at all a national retail or a regional retail in a certain zone, a la Laurel Street?
And I think that's if you elect to have the EDAC and the Planning Commission study this issue, that's certainly something that we could go into a little bit deeper. I think if you define those types of uses, you might have a better basis to limit those. You define them specifically. But generally speaking, we would recommend you go by type of use. But certainly we can research any other jurisdictions that might have done something like that.
Well, relative to that, recall for me, if you will, what kind of response we got on in terms of numbers and which way, the wind blew, if you will, on Blockbuster when we allowed Blockbuster, or we didn't allow it. It applied and it came in downtown at a corner, which is, I think, national retail as well, right?
That's correct. There was a lot of concern with Blockbuster, primarily focused on parking, at least the complaints that we received from the planning department and some of the other departments. I don't know if council members received other types of comments on that, but we haven't received any. It sort of was a six-month time period where we received a slew of complaints, and then that seemed to have died down.
So during the process, we got quite a few complaints, but once it was in, no complaints about the parking situation.
That's correct.
Or even Blockbuster itself.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Seamers, would you like to come up and?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Cullinan.
It's been a long day for me. Good evening, council members, Mayor Grocott. I usually start my day at 4:30 in the morning. To answer your question, Councilmember Doherty Teagle, the original numbers that you received were just a sampling that I had given to Mayor Grocott, which was 10 pages of signatures. What I gave Mayor Grocott today was the entire set of signatures, which I had made copies of. So Mayor Grocott has an entire set, which is a total of 1,243 signatures, of which 982 are San Carlos residents. The other 261 are basically non-resident people ranging from San Francisco to San Jose who come and shop in San Carlos, who come and visit our shops, who were just appalled by the fact that we're having a second Starbucks going in. My intent originally was not about Starbucks itself. It was about looking at and saying how many coffee outlets, not specifically coffee shops themselves, can we handle in the 3 blocks of the 6, 7, and 800 block with the limited customers that we have coming into downtown. If we dilute our customer base to this point, we will put a lot of people out of business. You were just talking about the Blockbusters. There was a small video store further down on the 800 block. They were put out of business by Blockbuster. We don't have another big Blockbuster video store on Laurel Street. It doesn't exist. We have some others in other areas, but not here on Laurel Street. So you can't really draw a comparison between the two because it's like apples and oranges. The thing was that it will most likely have very little impact on my own business. It could have some more significant impact on some of the other small coffee shops that we have in San Carlos. They're all run by very nice individual people. Starbucks has had a habit nationally to place themselves into an established area where there are coffee shops that are doing a fairly reasonable business and putting in 1 or 2 within a very close proximity in order to knock out the family business. That is a trend that's been verified nationwide. In New York, I've just heard some people talking, it's a disaster. If you've watched 60 Minutes, you will have seen Mr. Schultz give an interview. Some of his businesses have been trashed significantly because people are so angry with what they're doing, what they perceive they're doing.
Hans, Mr. Schultz
is the owner of Starbucks. To my knowledge, Starbucks owns all the Starbucks stores. There are no franchises, to my knowledge. Okay. He was a brilliant man. He had a great idea. He made it work. It's gotten to the point, however, now where I think we're affecting small individual businesses to the point where they're going to get knocked out, and I don't think that's good. We like to have San Carlos be a small town, have a small village environment. If you allow a lot of chain stores to come into San Carlos, you will eliminate that. It'll be just a mall type of environment. And instead of more people coming downtown, you will have less people coming downtown. Starbucks has about 95% of all its products that are come in, get it, and get out. And that's fine. However, their products, therefore, are non-taxable, which means there is no revenue for the city of San Carlos. There's no sales tax and there's no use tax. The only time that you collect sales and use tax with coffee or coffee shop is if you actually sit down in the coffee shop and consume the product. Okay? If you buy a cup of coffee and a to-go cup, there's no sales, there's no use tax. And that's a fact. So therefore, our city would not be making any revenue. Right now, all the little coffee shops that you have where people sit down, consume their coffee, consume their muffin, what have you, you get sales revenue from that. And so if you knock that out, you will lose more money. It might be a small amount, but it will proliferate itself. If you have too much of the same thing like you did with hairdressers and banks, again, people are not going to want to come downtown because there's not enough variety. I don't have the bullet, but a lot of the comments I receive from people is, we need more variety on Lowell Street. We want people to come down who want to do different types of shopping and be downtown. If you have too much of the same thing, they're not going to go there. And again, you're going to lose revenue. That's a pretty broad spectrum and a concern of mine. And yeah, I agree that, you know, we've got chains coming in here, and I think they're going to do a lot more destruction than good. That's my opinion. That's the opinion of all these people that have come and signed the petition. And so basically, I'm asking that, yes, you put a moratorium on like you've done with the banks, like you've done with the hairdressers. I'm sure that it would create a great deal of controversy legally if you now said, okay, stop, Starbucks, you can't put your second store in here, and I understand that, okay? There are towns in the United States that have totally blocked out Starbucks or other chain stores because they didn't want it. How they did it, I don't know, but they have done it. So anyways, I appreciate you giving me the time. I appreciate you putting it on the agenda. Thank you, members of the staff. Thank you, Liz, for the information you've given me. I appreciate that. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seamers. Any questions, council members, for Mr. Seamers? Thank you. Okay, we've heard from staff, we've heard from the applicant, as it were, and we do have a number of speaker cards on this. I see people waving at me from out in the audience there. So before we go into discussion, we will hear from these speakers, and I will call you out two by two. The first is Susan. Susan, I'm not going to pronounce your last name. You can do that for me if you wouldn't mind.
Good evening, council members and mayor, vice mayor, and staff. And thank you for this opportunity to say a couple of points. I'm a 28-year resident of San Carlos, and I'm a third-generation San Carlos resident. And I've seen it since I was a child. I value its character, its individual character. And, you know, newcomers, even young, professional newcomers from all over the country who come here say what they really like is the character. And those 3 blocks of downtown San Carlos do have some character. It would be great. And I'm here to ask you 2 things to please consider. One is to consider that entrepreneurs, individuals who start a business and risk their entire family savings and relate to the community and hire community members and have to answer to the community are the basis of democracy. And this is the foundation of democracy, is when small people get together and create communities of business, and then they can answer to larger powers, and that's the basis. And please, I would like you to support that and do whatever you can to make sure that that survives well and strong in San Carlos. And I had another point. I think that was my major point. The others, to just value the diversity, as Mr. Seymour said. I am not so certain that I would be against other coffee shops going up. I have heard the phrase, let the market decide. And something in me just rises up in rage at that statement. It's a very mindless statement to my point of view. What are you talking about? Let the market decide. You have a national chain, hugely funded, can use psychologists, demographics, has everything at their disposal to do whatever they want as far as promotionals and advertising, and the name recognition, the brand recognition will give you foot traffic. It will give you extra foot traffic. I'm not sure that's what you really want in the long run, and I do caution you to think, if you bring in people like Starbucks to that degree, and little businesses have to fade out, and they will, how could a city council bring those businesses back? There's no way you could afford to do what the little guy does. There's no way. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Next is Diane Palmy, followed by Chris Ice.
Good evening. So first of all, I would like to say that for the most part I'm in agreement with the things that you've heard this evening, and I too am appalled that there's another Starbucks going in. We didn't move to San Carlos to move to a place filled with Pottery Barn and The Gap and Starbucks and everything else. One of the reasons why we love San Carlos so much is because it is a small town and there is diversity, and I'm going to go to a place that I don't recognize, but it smells good or it looks good. And that's what makes me want to go inside. When I see Starbucks, I turn around and walk the other way. If that's my only choice, I'm not going to go. And if we do want to develop San Carlos and turn it into that kind of a community, we need to take some serious action and think about the plan that you did put in place that said, I want diversity in San Carlos. I want to make sure that I have an appropriate look and feel for what we believe the community should be. And the fact that we allowed another Starbucks to go in, I'm actually surprised, Councilmember Dougherty, that you did not realize they were going to keep both locations. Why did this not come forward if we had a master plan for downtown San Carlos? Why didn't the permit get reviewed? Whether they're in complete compliance. At the end of the day, they needed to make modifications. They were putting something in that technically falls under the purview of the strategic plan that we're talking about. Why didn't it come before us? So perhaps we need to take a stronger tone with the Planning Commission and ask them, should any of these types of businesses want to come in, whether they are personally owned, whether they're corporate owned or otherwise. We have a strategic location within downtown San Carlos. We want to make sure that we're getting the appropriate amount of diversity. So one of the recommendations, I think, was to go back to EDAC, allow them to study it. Great, study it, but stop doing anything else until they have an opportunity to come back and say, what's the right thing for us to do? Unfortunately, I think the horse is out of the barn and we're shutting the door behind it. Starbucks is going to go in. I don't know that we have any legal recourse to do anything there. But I would hope we would take this as a lesson and do something to prevent any further changing of the character of San Carlos and having more stores like this go in before we really think about whether or not that fits into our master plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Ice, followed by Valerie. And Valerie, I'm not going to butcher your last name, so.
I did a good job with ICE, though. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Chris Ice, I'm a 10-year resident of San Carlos. I'll also add that I was somewhat shocked to see that there was a second Starbucks going in. As I've watched over the years, the City Council talk about the vision for developing downtown San Carlos as a place for people to come to. I doubt highly that families are going to be flocking in droves from Palo Alto to come to our second Starbucks. So if you've read the book Fast Food Nation, the practice of what's called brand bombing, which I believe is what Starbucks actually invented, is a very well-known practice, and we get to watch it in action right here. The whole purpose of that tactic is really to choke and starve local businesses, so the only thing left is them. And I would say that I'm somewhat disappointed in my city government for letting this one get by them and letting it get as far as it has. So I do agree with the staff recommendation that moratoriums are probably a fairly heavy-handed way to deal with this situation. And I think, if not worded very carefully, could have some unintended consequences harming other locally owned, locally operated businesses. But I will say that I don't want to see a moratorium, but I also don't want to see another Starbucks. So I think, and I hope, there's another way to deal with this situation. So I'd ask the council's consideration in that.
Thank you, Chris. Valerie?
Good evening. Sorry, I'm not used to speak like this. The reason, my name is Valerie. I buy a business 3 years ago in San Carlos, and the thing I really like, and he remember me, because San Carlos is like a village with character and wonderful thing. But I learned we may allow to another Starbucks, and I think if you allow a brand like this, company like this, is open the door to bring more company. Like Burlingame Avenue now is all company doesn't have any charm, anything, and that's why I want to protect the downtown San Carlos to stay local owner with charm, because one day they come Uptown Cafe, they like the town like it is, and I would like to protect that. That's why I came here, and I like here. And if you allow Starbucks coffee with big company who has more powerful than us, who can pay a lot rent than us, we're going to move away, because the rent's going to be up, and it's going to be run away the local owner because we cannot pay the rent anymore. That's it.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you. Okay, that completes public comment on this item. Council, we're open for discussion.
Perhaps I can go first since I need to jet out of here.
Oh, excuse me, Inga, would you mind
Could I
making
make
a
a quick
motion?
motion to, or somebody make a quick motion, or I'll make a motion
Because
to.
I'm going to say no because I can't stay.
I'll second.
All right, you can say no. I mean, we have to vote, don't,
Yeah,
aren't
no,
we
no,
supposed to
agree.
vote to go past 10:30?
Yeah,
Looking
absolutely.
at the city attorney? I'm sorry, I apologize. Moved and seconded, is there?
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I was going to offer an amendment to 11 p.m., just because that's what I've got tonight, so.
I'll defer to Council Member Lewis that we end at 11 o'clock.
Well, we got to really move this meeting along then.
I'd sure be happy to do that, Tom.
Inga, I'm sorry. Matt?
What do we have on the table then? Another
I'd
motion?
amended to we amended it to.
Did you amend this second?
Hey, I can be here all night. You know, I'm kind of cozy right here on this chair, and I.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
Berlin's got
I'll
to jet
amend
out
it.
and pick you up.
To
11
what time?
o'clock?
11?
11 o'clock?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
11 o'clock? Okay. All in favor, ending at 11 o'clock?
Aye.
Aye.
No. Just
Okay, carry
put
on.
it out there.
Councilmember
I just
Doherty.
wanted to, I can certainly appreciate the need to have diversity. It's interesting hearing the comments. I too value. I grew up here in San Carlos. I've been here for I don't even want to tell you how many years, but more than you, and have seen it grow, have seen it change, and have always liked the fact that the market has been pretty good about sort of dictating what uses are supported, and we've had a very nice diversity here in town. I'm noticing more and more there's a lot of consolidation in the retail market. There's a lot of consolidation in chains. Not that I agree with that. And however, I can understand how this particular application sort of flew under the radar because it's a permitted use, I would imagine. And staff wouldn't have any reason for it not to come through as a permitted use. I'd be surprised if it even hit Planning Commission. So the fact that we don't review every single application that comes through for a permitted use does not surprise me. However, having said that, I think this is indicative of the type of thing that we as a council talked about when we talked about our strategic plan. In fact, on one of our 3-year goals here is to review the West Side specific plan. And I think that this, looking at our downtown and looking at the types of uses and the diversity that we would like to have, not just within those 3 blocks of Laurel Street, but also within what I would consider our West Side specific plan area, which also includes San Carlos Avenue, and perhaps even visioning a little bit farther south, I think has a lot of merit. So while I agree that legally Starbucks is probably out of the barn with the door closed behind it, I'm not sure that the door has been closed yet, but I think that what we should certainly do is, when this comes before us in August, certainly have a good, long discussion about the types of things like whether or not we want to just say, is coffee shops the flavor of the month, or is it Italian restaurants downtown? I mean, we hear, in fact, I see Cheryl from the chamber sitting here as well. I'm sure she hears it all as well. How come we have so many, name a use, Chinese food restaurants, Italian food restaurants, coffee shops, banks, nail salons, and I think that really bears a lot of discussion about, do we want to just restrict it to coffee shops in those 3 blocks? My opinion would be that under the West Side specific plan, we actually really more consider just perhaps frequency of like uses, and not focus it specifically just on this. And at the same time, also, I just want to clarify for everyone who's here, the city does not go out and, petition Starbucks to come and open up yet another Starbucks in San Carlos. And in fact, if we did that, I think I'd probably be saying to staff, well, let's look at, maybe, and I don't want to choose brands, but, a Pete's or a different type, okay, I'm sure it's all coming. But really, I think that, again, rather than take this out of context, we've got an part of our 3-year goals is really the West Side specific plan, and I certainly see this as pretty critical as part of that strategic planning. So I'd like to request that perhaps we have staff look at that as part of the West Side specific plan development.
I'd be willing to go a little deeper than Councilmember Doherty has suggested. But first, let me say something in defense of Starbucks. If you want coffee between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m., you got to go to Starbucks. If you want coffee between 5 p.m. roughly and 9 p.m., you got to go to Starbucks. And I think that speaks something for the character of the city we're in, and the fact that people go to Starbucks, and they go repeatedly to Starbucks because of the hours of service, first of all, gets them in the door. And there must be something about the quality of the coffee and the quality of the pastry and a few other things. So my point is Starbucks does serve a purpose. I'm not sure they need 2 stores, but they're going to have them. And I'm sure they see their market here as being a bit higher than they've been able to satisfy on the corner of Laurel and San Carlos. So, having said that, I wouldn't object to going further and having an emergency ordinance on additional coffee shops in the 3-block area and turning it over to EDAC for study. I do think we ought to put a time limit of 6 months on it and come back with a report and a recommendation and see where it goes. I do think we have enough coffee shops to get by for a while, even though we don't have Peach yet, which is my personal favorite. But I'm willing to forego that and put a hold on it. So the suggestion for discussion is an emergency ordinance that would forbid any additional coffee shops in the 3-block area and turn the matter over to EDAC for study and recommendation in a reasonable period of time.
And to move this matter along, I'd like to add to Tom's discussion item because I agree with it entirely. The thing I would like to add to it, though, is, and staff, you can stomp on this if it's not legal, but I would also like to have EDAC look at the possibility of some kind of ordinance that would require applications for the 3-block area of Laurel Street, 6, 7, and 800 block, that when applications come to the city from any regional or national retail, that those be reviewed by the Planning Commission and automatically also go to the City Council for approval and consideration before that's approved. So I would like to, and I am adding to your discussion item there, Tom, and I don't see it in the form of a motion yet, but that EDAC would consider that proposal as well.
Just a comment, first of all. Takes a 4/5 vote of the entire council, so that means it's going to have to be unanimous. That's number one. Number two, you've got to make health and safety findings before you can establish a moratorium. So I don't think staff has suggested any to you tonight. If you want to put pencil to the paper, I mean, we'll do our best. Your moratorium is only for 45 days, and then you have to have a public hearing and to consider an extension, which means we virtually would have to start planning for the meeting within 45 days for an extension. The extension is 10 months, 15 days. That's the way the state law reads. I think the thing I'm most concerned about is the health and safety findings on coffee shops. I mean, I understand the retail impact to certain stores. If there were more coffee shops threatened, I haven't heard any evidence on the record tonight of more coffee shops threatening to come in. Certainly, they would have to make application to the building department, to the planning department for something, whether it's facade approval or building permit. And at that point in time, if there were any, staff could certainly bring it forward to you. If there's also some other evidence that, a saturation of coffee shops per se is an adverse economic impact to downtown. When we did banks, it wasn't that hard to make a finding that too many banks side by side discouraged retail shopping and trade and was an adverse impact in the downtown. So that was the basis for banks not being within 500 feet and also on corners. The other moratorium we had was in 1993 when we did a moratorium on all uses in the downtown except for retail and restaurants. Those were accepted from, that's where the nail salon, beauty salon moratorium came in. It wasn't focused on beauty salons and nail salons. It was on all uses other than retail and restaurants. And it was a planning study, and it was sent back to the Planning Commission to study the West Side Specific Plan and to come forward with recommendations to the council. That's normally the reason you'd have a moratorium. You're in the middle of a West Side Specific Plan or in the middle of consideration of some legislation or general plan amendment. That'd be the reason for putting that moratorium in place to prevent anybody else from coming in. And I haven't heard, I'm sure other communities have done it, but I'd sure like to have more information and a study as to how you can legislate against a chain. I mean, we're not talking about Walmart's coming in. We're talking about chain stores. I mean, even a Talbot's, small dress shop would be excluded by regional retail. I mean, we've gone out and solicited, in the past, as I understand it, Gap, Talbert's, and others to come in to some of the downtown locations on the basis, from economic studies we've had, that they would be good for business. So I would certainly like to find some other communities that have prohibited regional retail, or it's not regional retail. Regional retail is at 25,000 square foot size. I mean, retail that's owned by a chain. And I'm not sure how you define that, but I think we all have an idea what it means. But I'd like to see other communities that have kept those stores out. I don't know of any. I'm not even sure Carmel has kept those stores out. Maybe if you have a historic district, something like that, but it would really have to be studied. So, number one, I think you have to, whatever staff has recommended referral to the Planning Commission, EDAC, which I think is a sound idea. Following that up with a moratorium, I think, takes a little more evidence in the record. And maybe you don't want to do that tonight. You could put it on another meeting if you really want to bring that back. Because, again, I don't know of any threat that's on the horizon immediately. And you're right, the Starbucks has a vested right at this point in time. A building permit has been issued. They have spent money on the location. It's too late. It would be a taking by the city if you were to try and stop the Starbucks.
Couple questions following up on what you just told us, Bob. Findings that you mentioned, health and welfare and so forth, that's for an emergency?
That's for the urgency ordinance. It's in Liz's staff report.
Okay,
and
but
it's
if
right from the 65858.
If we took away the language of an urgency ordinance and just wanted to consider a moratorium on, and not really a moratorium so much as an ordinance that would space these coffee shops out, that would not have quite as high a bar to get over legally?
You could refer consideration of such an ordinance, such legislation, to the Planning Commission and EDAC for consideration and a report back to you. Without an urgency ordinance, without a moratorium, correct?
Correct. And then if we applied such an ordinance, it would not require these findings on health, safety, and welfare.
Well, every zoning ordinance requires health, safety, and welfare findings, but it'd be legislation, and if there was any rational basis to it at all, it would probably be upheld.
Okay. And then just to clarify, the item I was speaking of that I was adding to Tom's discussion item was not a prohibition, but simply a review process by which regional and national retail would have to pass through in order to get approval for their project at a location.
That could be considered, but again, we'd have to find a way to make sure it's not what would you consider a violation of equal protection, that we're not somehow legislating heavily against a store that's owned on other than a local basis, discriminatory.
But I suppose one of the
I'd like to
items
find someplace else that's been done before, so that we're not out there in federal court with Starbucks or whoever else it would be fighting this battle.
Okay. I'm going to stop talking and dominating here and let other council members speak up.
So to that point, that was the thing. It'd be interesting to look at. The way in on that, for me, that I see is perhaps trying to restrict the repetition of a same store within some minimum distance. That was sort of the way into this one that I thought we might be able to consider. So if it's the council's pleasure to look into that, I would love to see if there's any.
Same store or same brand, or either or?
We'd have to, I don't know how to define those terms, but the idea being that, so that way it's not discriminatory toward any one thing, other than the fact that we think it discourages perhaps vibrant retail by having same stores within close proximity. So that would be one thing I'd like to consider. I have a technical question as well. I don't believe Starbucks offers, do you want to have that here, or do you want that to go? In other words, the idea of tax revenue coming from that. They have a bar inside that you can sit at and consume. There is tables sometimes in the cafe area in adjunct to it. So, but I've never been offered a regular cup there. You always just get offered a paper cup when I can't get into Han's place. So the question is, sorry, just to be clear, is there even an option to Starbucks to get tax revenue from it without that offer?
We actually do get revenue from Starbucks and the other coffee shops, but I think our experience is that really in the food group, the place where we get the most sales tax revenue are in the bigger restaurants where they have the higher ticket items, and as the gentleman pointed out, the food is consumed on site. The coffee shops as a group tend not to be fairly lucrative, but we could certainly do some research on that if the council is interested.
Brad, if I may, Starbucks does, if we're receiving sales tax, as Brian indicates, it could be because they sell coffee cups, they sell coffee in a package,
Okay.
those kinds of things.
They sell
Retail
CDs.
sales.
Yeah,
Other
exactly.
retail, I understand, but I guess I was just going to consuming on the premises or not doesn't seem
But
to
you're
be-
right. No, the coffee always comes in a paper cup.
Anyway, I guess for me, just to sort of go to the broader point, I mean, I share, it seems like what's fairly unanimous concern here about somehow we want to, we want to encourage vigorous business downtown because that's a good thing for the city, but we're sort of cultural stewards here, and I think all of us, I know I certainly worry about the squeeze out of the small business owner and that lack of culture. Otherwise, it feels like you're going to a mall or an airport, and I don't think any of us want to become that. So the other question that I thought was good in some of the staff material here was how does one encourage and incent small business owners in such a way, maybe as a council, we can also consider how we incent that, because I think it is a shared community value from my perspective. And I do think it's an essential part of maintaining our character as we move forward. So it seems at this point we have no legal recourse on the current situation with Starbucks. But I think EDAC to study pursuant to a West Side specific plan update, either a moratorium in this case, or how do we incent the small business owner? How do we perhaps even incent the small business owner to open the hours, like Vice Mayor David said? I'd love to see more businesses open at night. Being a person that works outside of San Carlos during the day, I can't get stuff done downtown at night. I'm forced to go somewhere during the workday, and I don't want to. I think we should immediately get EDAC to try to study this issue in Planning Commission, try to come back with ideas for incentives, and perhaps some advice on moratorium or how we move forward from this point within those core blocks of downtown.
I'm going to again, to move this along, looking at the time, suggest a motion. There's the word. It's getting late. See how the brain works when it gets late. I'm going to suggest a motion that we charge EDAC with all immediacy to consider limiting coffee shops within a given proximity to one another, consider how to incent small business, and I'm going to tag on the thing that I'd asked for, that they look at, along with staff, what it would mean to require national and regional retail to go through a process of review with both the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Would you consider making that more active to come back with the recommendations on this? I think you said to study, right?
Oh, that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Right, that would be part of it, is asking EDAC to look at this with all immediacy and come back to us with recommendations.
And possibly within a defined time. I mean, I don't know if we can call their time, but we are the coffee haven of the peninsula, and we could well find 2 or 3 more before they got back.
Right.
So I don't know. I think Mark can make that call as to when they ought to return with a report, but sooner than later, I would think.
Yeah,
Just to clarify, we would undoubtedly go from EDAC to the Planning Commission, to the Council.
Excuse me? Say again?
The logical progression would be from EDAC to the Planning Commission.
To Council.
To Council. In terms of proposed changes to the West Side Plan or the zoning code.
Okay, that's fine, but again, with all immediacy.
I'd second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion by myself, the mayor, a second by Councilmember Lewis, and open for discussion, or we can go directly to a vote.
Vote.
Okay, a roll call.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Okay, that brings us, where does that bring us? Brings us within 8 minutes of 11 o'clock, the witching hour. And we were coming to item 9C,
Just
Through the chair, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Yes. Through the chair, I don't believe we're going to get through 9C if we're going to handle it like 9B.
Well,
So my point is, I don't also know whether 10A is going to get done in the next 5 minutes, but I think we should go back to E, J, and K of 8, just for the city manager or for the staff to be able to award these contracts or not award these contracts, unless this is going to be a line-by-line item on these contracts too. So that's my proposal, is to go back to 8, E, J, and K on our consent calendar
And I will.
before we get to 9C.
Okay, and we don't need a motion on that or anything. I will just take that recommendation. We will go to item 8E, which is, if I can get there.
Adoption of Ordinance 1371, amending San Carlos Municipal Code, Chapter 18.136, for signs.
Thank you.
And it was pulled off by a member of the public who apparently is not here anymore.
That's correct.
So I would call the question. Am I allowed to do that? Thank you.
You need a second on that. You've got a motion.
You should read the ordinance, however.
I'll be happy to.
I thought there was a motion to waive the reading of all ordinances. You have to read the title.
Title, not the whole thing.
Yeah, just the title.
Didn't I just read the title? All right. Okay, yellow page. What page is it, kids?
Help you?
Help me out here.
This is ordinance number 1371, an ordinance of the City of San Carlos amending the San Carlos Municipal Code, amending the sign ordinance section 18.150.040, providing a definition for community activity signs.
Thank you.
And having read it, will you second the motion?
I will.
Okay, it has been moved by Councilmember Grisilli and seconded by Vice Mayor Davids. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes. Okay, and I am going to make a suggestion actually on items J and K, and I was remiss in not bringing this up with the city manager or the council when we were considering the Neil Martin Association contract, and that is, to my council members, I had read also through the contract which is under item 8M, a contract with Turbo Data Systems, and when I read it, I found many items. This is obviously a sort of a boilerplate contract. Many items in this boilerplate contract which are not in our contracts. I also found in some cases where the same issue was addressed, it was addressed, one might say, more in depth, more thoroughly. And so I was going to actually ask earlier on, and I forgot, to have all the contracts on tonight's agenda taken back to staff and put through their paces, if you will, in comparison to this contract, so that any future contracts we might accept would have some more complete language. So having said all that, that was my point in pulling J and K off of the consent calendar. And since we're not going to get to the Muctari contract tonight, we could also perhaps give direction to staff to look at the Muctari contract in light of some of the language of the contract we see with 8M, which apparently was written by staff and legal counsel in Millbrae? Daly City, thank you. Yeah, Daly City. So if...
Through the chair, I'm thoroughly confused, but I'm also thoroughly tired. What contract are you saying is the good one or the bad one, or one that you want to look at?
Yeah, Turbo Data, which
you
is...
like that one?
Yes.
You like that one? You like M?
Turbo
Yes,
Data,
8M.
good.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't agree with you, but I'm willing to make a vote on J and K right now. I'll make a motion that we, if through the chair, if I can do that without jumping on you. I don't mean to do that.
No, you can certainly make the motion. What I was asking for is that we just not take any further action on any contracts tonight. Ask staff to review contract under 8M, and where they feel it might be appropriate to adopt some of that language in our boilerplate contracts. Then when we review the contracts at our next meeting, which they will be on the agenda, some of that language may be in the new contract, the new boilerplate contract. And I'm sorry, I did talk to the city manager about this earlier today. He was going to talk to the city attorney, and we did not talk after that. So,
well, I'll still make the motion that we approve items 8M, or pardon me, 8J and 8K. but
I'll second the motion.
Okay.
Well, on the question, recognizing that we've done this style that we're approving tonight for many, many years, and I know there's many ways you can write a contract, like there are many ways you can write a lease. I see no objection to proceeding with our standard form, although I do think Matt has brought up a point that we should address, and that's the question of dealing with perhaps the more complete language, if that's what it turns out to be. But I see no reason to delay J and K because of that review.
Okay, there's been a motion, there's been a second. Roll call.
I also share the sentiments. I think it's worth taking a look at as a template and sort of comparing those and see if it makes sense to sort of, so I think it's a fair point, but I agree with Vice Mayor Davids.
I also agree it's a fair point, but I still think that we need to get on with some of the city's business.
Roll call.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes. Okay, and I think that leaves the remainder items to be postponed until our next council meeting, which would be, what did I do with my agenda? I'm sorry.
12? June 5th? Is that right?
The Matari contract, and I believe that's it.
And the warrant procedures.
Oh, and warrant
10A.
procedures. So if staff could, if we could postpone those items to June 12th, we will do that. Do we need a motion for that, Bob? No? Okay, we do not. So that brings us to the end of our agenda, and we do not any longer have public comment at the end, so we are adjourned.